Hey guys, tonight we are going to try something a little different. A sort of historical survival challenge, that from the comfort of your own bed, we are going to step into the shoes. The probably very worn, possibly non-existent shoes of a child laborer during the peak of the Industrial Revolution in 19th century Britain. And I will be honest, the title of this journey is Why You Would Not Last a Day. And it is not an exaggeration. It is a gentle reminder of how cushy our lives are, even on a bad day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Only do this if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are at it, I would love to know where you are listening from. Drop your city and the current time in the comments below. It is always fascinating to see where our little history community is spread out across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let us ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is not a sound. It is the cold. A deep, penetrating cold that seems to radiate from the stone floor, through the thin pile of straw and rags you call a bed, and settle deep into your bones. There is no gentle awakening here. No soft sunlight filtering through a window. No smell of coffee brewing. The world is as black as pitch, and the air is thick with the damp, musty smell of the crowded tenement room you share with your family and perhaps another family. Or two, you feel a sharp, insistent tapping. It is not on a door, but on the grimy window pane of the room. Tap, tap, tap. It is a metallic, rhythmic sound, relentless and sharp. This is your alarm clock. This is the knocker-up. This is a real and rather peculiar profession from the era. A person hired by the factories, or by the workers themselves, to walk the pre-dawn streets with a long pole, often made of bamboo, to tap on the upper story windows of the workers and ensure they are awake. There is no snooze button. The tapping only stops when you show a sign of life, perhaps by lighting a candle or waving a tired hand. The knocker-up has many more windows to get to before his own day starts. And he is not a patient man. The groan of your father from the other side of the small room is the signal. It is time to move. Every part of your small body aches. It is not the ache of a good night's sleep, but the dull, persistent pain of exhaustion that never really left you from yesterday's work. You are somewhere between 6 and 8 years old, though you do not really know for sure. Birthdays are not a concept you have the luxury of celebrating. You only know you are small enough to be useful for certain tasks. And that is all that matters. You slide off your straw mattress, your bare feet hitting the freezing, uneven floor. You slept in your work clothes. They are stiff with grime and sweat. A single set of thin, patched-up trousers and a rough spun shirt. Changing clothes is not part of the routine. The air is so cold, you can see your breath, a small, fleeting cloud in the darkness. You can hear your younger siblings stirring, their soft whimpers a miserable chorus in the dark. This is where you encounter a rather grim piece of social history that historians still quietly debate. Many families, especially newcomers to the city, could not even afford a whole room. They might rent a corner, or even just a spot on the floor. In the most crowded places, a system called hot bedding was common. This meant you paid for a spot in a bed for a set number of hours. As you are getting up now, after in the morning, to head to the textile mill, another person, perhaps a night shift worker or a dockhand, is waiting to take your place in the still warm pile of straw. The concept of a personal, private space to sleep was a level of luxury you could not even comprehend. Academics still argue about how widespread this practice was, with some suggesting it was a desperate measure in the most overcrowded city slums, while others believe it was a more structured, if miserable, part of the urban working class economy. Your body is screaming for more sleep, for warmth, for just a moment of peace. But your mind knows the consequences of being late. It is not a stern talking to or a deduction in allowance. It is a fine from your meager pay, or worse, the strap from the overseer. The fear is a more effective stimulant than any caffeine. It is a cold, hard knot in the pit of your stomach. You fumble in the dark, your hands searching for your shoes. They are more leather scraps than footwear, worn and tarred, and do little to protect against the cold, but they are better than nothing. You do not wash your face or brush your teeth. The single water pump is down in the courtyard, shared by 50 other families, and there is no time. There is only the factory. The factory is a god in this world. It dictates when you wake, when you sleep, when you eat, and for many, when you will die. The rhythm of your life is not governed by the sun or the seasons, but by the factory whistle, a sound you have not yet heard this morning, but a sound that already echoes in your mind. You stand there for a moment, a small, shivering silhouette in the suffocating darkness of the room. The day's labor already a crushing weight on your shoulders before it has even truly begun. You shuffle towards the faint orange glow at the far end of the room. This is the hearth, the heart of this small, cramped space. Your mother is already there, a hunched silhouette against the weak light of a few dying embers she has carefully coaxed back to life. She does not speak. Mornings are not for words. They are for conserving every scrap of energy. The air here smells of certain something perpetually damp. In her hands is a small, blackened pot, and from it she ladles a thin, grayish liquid into a few wooden bowls. This is your breakfast. It is called gruel, or porridge, but it bears little resemblance to the warm, comforting oatmeal you might imagine. This is oat husk and water, boiled until it becomes a semi-translucent slurry. Sometimes, if the week has been a good one, there might be a spoonful of molasses or a pinch of salt, but not today. Today, it is just a watery, lukewarm substance that slides down your throat with a slightly gritty texture. You take your bowl, your fingers wrapping around the rough wood. There is no table to sit at. You find a spot on the floor, your back against the cold, grimy wall, and begin to eat. The act is mechanical. You raise the spoon, you swallow. There is no flavor, no satisfaction, just the grim necessity of putting something, anything, into your stomach to fight off the hunger pangs that will soon begin to gnaw at you. This is the fuel for the machine, and you are the machine. Alongside the gruel, there is a piece of bread. It is dark, heavy, and hard. You have to gnaw at it, your small jaw working hard to break off a piece, and here you encounter one of the quiet, everyday betrayals of your time. This bread is likely not just flour and water. The science of the era was not one of nutrition, but of profit. It was a common, almost expected practice for bakers to adulterate their food to make it look better or weigh more. Your bread might have chalk or alum mixed into the flour to make it appear whiter and more appealing. Sawdust or even clay could be added to increase its weight, meaning you paid for volume, not substance. This is one of the era's cruel little secrets. You are not just eating a miserable meal. You are potentially eating things that offers zero nutritional value and could be actively harmful. You can sometimes taste the grit, a strange, earthy texture that is not from the grain. You do not know the science behind it, but you know this bread does not taste right. that it sits in your stomach like a stone. The nutritional science of today would tell you that this breakfast is a catastrophe. It is almost pure carbohydrate, with virtually no protein, fat, vitamins, or minerals. It provides a short, sharp burst of energy that will burn out within the first hour of your 16-hour workday, leaving you running on empty for the remaining 15. This diet is a direct cause of the stunted growth, the weak bones, and the chronic illnesses that plague you and everyone you know. Rickets, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin D, is rampant, leaving children with bowed legs and fragile skeletons. Historians still wrestle with the question of whether this devastating malnutrition was purely a matter of economic desperation or also a crisis of knowledge. For generations, rural families, while poor, often had access to a more varied diet, a small vegetable patch, a chicken, foraged grains, or fish from a stream. But as millions were pulled into these new, sprawling industrial cities, that ancestral knowledge was severed. You are now completely dependent on what can be bought, and all you can afford are the cheapest, most heavily processed starches. There is no garden, no stream, no forest. There is only the corner shop, with its questionable bread and sacks of oats. The debate continues whether the sheer lack of money or the catastrophic loss of nutritional understanding was the greater culprit in the health crisis that defined the urban poor. You finish your portion. You do not dare ask for more. There is not any. You can hear your father coughing, a deep, rattling cough that seems to shake the whole room. It is a wet, productive cough. They call it the brown lung, or by SSI. It is what happens when you spend your life breathing in cotton dust. The fibers clog your lungs, creating a permanent, debilitating inflammation. His fate is a constant, unspoken preview of your own future. You place the empty bowl on the floor. The meager meal has done little to warm you or quell the deep ache in your muscles. Instead, it has only served as a reminder of how empty you are, and how much will be demanded of you today. The silence in the room is heavy, thick with unspoken anxieties. The fear of the day ahead is a taste in your mouth far stronger than the bland gruel. You can already hear the phantom roar of the looms. Feel the vibration of the factory floor through the soles of your feet. Your father pushes himself to his feet with a pained grunt. It is time. There are no words of encouragement. No "have a good day." Such sentiments would be a mockery. He just gives you a brief, tired glance, and you know it is time to face the darkness outside. The first part of your day, the awakening and the meal, was over. It was a trial of endurance in itself, that you know, with a cold certainty, that it was the easiest part of the day. The true test is just beginning. You follow your father out of the room, stepping carefully over the sleeping forms of your younger siblings who are, for now, too small to be of use to the factory. The passageway of the tenement building is even darker and colder than your room. It stinks, a cooling mix of unwashed bodies, stale cooking fumes, and something foul seeping up from the overflowing cesspit in the courtyard below. There are no lights in these halls. You place a hand on the damp, sticky wall to guide yourself, your other hand clutching the back of your father's rough trousers. Emerging into the courtyard is like stepping into a different world, but not a better one. The air is sharper, colder, and carries the reek of the city. Coal smoke hangs heavy, catching in the back of your throat and making your eyes water. Even in the pre-dawn blackness, the sky above is not truly black, but a hazy, polluted orange from the gas lights of the main streets and the eternal fires of the factories. This orange glow is your sun now. The street is a river of ghosts. Hundreds of people, silent and hunched against the cold, are moving in the same direction. The only sounds are the shuffling of worn-out shoes on the cobblestones and the ever-present, hacking cough that seems to pass from one person to the next like a shared language. They are all heading towards the same destination. You see other children, some even smaller than you, their faces pale and thin in the gloom. Some are alone. Others are with an older sibling or a parent. There are no skipping, no laughing, no childish games. These are tiny adults, their faces etched with a seriousness that does not belong on a child. Their shoulders are slumped, their eyes fixed on the ground ahead. It is a silent, grim procession. The journey to the factory is not long in distance, maybe a mile, but it feels endless. The streets are not paved sidewalks. They are uneven cobblestones, slick with a disgusting layer of mud, horsemanure, and refuse thrown from the windows above. You have to watch every step. A fall would mean landing in a foul-smelling puddle that could soak your thin clothes, leaving you to shiver for the entire day. Your feet are numb with cold, the thin leather of your shoes offering little protection. This walk through the city gives you a front row seat to the staggering inequality of your time. You might pass a grander street, lit by rows of gas lamps, where the large, clean houses of the factory owners and merchants stand silent and dark. You might catch a glimpse through a tall window of a curtained room, a world of warmth and comfort that is as alien to you as the surface of the moon. This is a cold, hard fact of the Industrial Revolution. The very system that is grinding you into dust is simultaneously generating immense, unprecedented wealth for a select few. The factory that consumes your childhood is the same factory that builds these mansions. You do not think in terms of economic theory, but you feel the injustice in a primal, visceral way. It is the contrast between your shivering, hungry form on the street and the silent, imposing warmth of those houses. As you get closer to the factory district, the air changes. The general smell of coal smoke intensifies, and a new sound begins to creep into the edges of the silence. A low, deep hum. It is a vibration you feel more than hear at first, a thrumming in the soles of your feet and in your chest. With every step, the hum grows louder, becoming a rumble, then a roar. This is the sound of the beast waking up. Here, you encounter a curious and rather sad bit of urban planning history. These factories were not built on the outskirts of town. They were erected right in the heart of the new worker housing districts. There was no such thing as zoning. A massive, smoke-belching textile mill could be built directly across the street from the tenements where its workers live. This was seen as efficient. Workers could get to their jobs quickly, and the factory owners did not have to worry about transportation. But the consequence was a life lived under the constant shadow of the workplace. There was no escape. The noise, the smoke, the pollution. It was your neighbor, your view, your entire sensory world, 24 hours a day. Historians sometimes debate the intentionality of this. They question if it was purely a matter of convenience and cost-cutting, or if it was also a subtle form of control, ensuring the workforce was always within the factory's sphere of influence, audibly and visually reminded of their role. The streets are now more crowded, the river of people becoming a torrent, all being funneled towards the same few massive brick buildings. The factory looms ahead of you now, a monstrous silhouette against the polluted dawn. It is a vast, rectangular fortress of dark brick, 5 or 6 stories high, with row after row of small, dark windows. Smoke pours from a towering chimney, a thick black plume that stains the sky. The rumble is deafening now, a physical force that seems to shake the very ground you stand on. It is the combined roar of 1,000 machines, all working in unison. A mechanical heartbeat that powers the city. You see the shoulders of your father tense up as you approach the main gate. The walk is over. The brief, cold illusion of freedom is gone. You are at the threshold. The air is thick with the smell of machine oil and damp cotton. A smell that will cling to your clothes, your hair, and your skin for the rest of your short life. You are a small child, standing at the gates of an industrial giant, about to be swallowed whole for the next 16 hours. Your heart, which was a cold knot of fear before, is now pounding in time with the monstrous rhythm of the factory. You take a shaky breath, the smoky air burning your lungs, and prepare to step inside. You walk through the massive, arched gateway. It feels like entering the mouth of some great brick beast. The roar, which was deafening outside, becomes an all-consuming physical presence inside the factory yard. The ground vibrates, and the air itself seems to tremble. Standing near the entrance is a man you learn to recognize very quickly. He is the overseer. But one of them. He is not a large man, but he carries himself with an air of absolute authority. In his hand, he holds a leather strap. It is not for show. He does not greet anyone. His eyes, cold and sharp, scan the faces of the workers flooding in. He is watching the clock. A huge, imposing timepiece mounted on the wall above the entrance. This clock is the real master here. If you are even a minute late, your pay for the first hour is docked. If you are 15 minutes late, you might lose half a day's wages or be strapped as an example to the others. The fear of this man, and the clock he serves, is what keeps the river of workers flowing so quickly. Your father gives you a small, almost imperceptible push, urging you forward into the main building. You step over the threshold and the sensory assault intensifies tenfold. If the yard was a roar, the work floor is an apocalypse of sound. It is a physical blow. You feel it in your teeth, in your bones. A wall of noise so dense it feels like you could lean against it. It is not just one sound, but a chaotic symphony of 1,000 different noises blended into one unbearable cacophony. The thunderous clatter of hundreds of power looms, the high-pitched whirring of thousands of spinning spindles, the rhythmic chugging of pistons, a hiss of steam, the shrieking of metal gears. You instinctively want to cover your ears, but you do not. You see no one else doing it. It is a sign of weakness. You learn to endure it. This is a key historical point about the Industrial Revolution. It introduced humanity to a new level of noise pollution that was previously unimaginable. For all of human history, the world had been relatively quiet, governed by the sounds of nature, animals, and human voices. The factory floor was something entirely new. Hearing loss was not a risk. It was a certainty for anyone who worked here for any length of time. People developed a unique way of communicating, a sort of sign language mixed with exaggerated lip reading, shouting directly into each other's ears. But mostly, they did not communicate at all. The noise isolated you, trapping you in your own head, even when surrounded by hundreds of other people. The air is hot and thick with the damp, cloying humidity. Steam pipes run overhead, hissing, and occasional, dripping hot water onto the floor below. And then there is the dust. A fine, white mist of cotton fiber hangs in the air, catching in the beams of light from the gas lamps like a bizarre indoor snowstorm. You breathe it in with every gasp, and you can already feel it coating the inside of your mouth and the back of your throat. You see the faces of the other workers. They are blank, expressionless masks. Their movements are swift, economical, and practiced. They move with a kind of desperate grace, navigating the narrow aisles between the roaring machines. Their eyes are constantly moving, checking the threads, watching the shuttles, alert for any sign of a break or a jam. There is no camaraderie here, no idle chat. There is only the work. This is where you might encounter a rather strange, and now obsolete, piece of factory infrastructure, the spitting. While most people associate them with chewing tobacco and saloons, in the early textile mills, they were everywhere. The constant inhalation of cotton dust forced the lungs to produce a huge amount of mucus to try and trap the fibers. Workers, including children, were constantly coughing and spitting up thick phlegm to maintain some semblance of cleanliness and to prevent the floors from becoming even more hazardous. Rows of spit and nests were provided. It was a grim admission by the factory owners that the very air in their facility was toxic. Of course, this did nothing to solve the underlying problem. It just managed one of its most visible symptoms. The debate among historians is a subtle one. They question whether this was a rudimentary form of health and safety, a primitive attempt to manage workplace hygiene, or if it was purely about efficiency, keeping the floors clean so people would not slip and slow down production. The scale of the place is overwhelming. Rows upon rows of machines stretch into the gloom. Farther than you can see, the ceiling is a dark web of wheels, belts, and pulleys, all spinning and turning, a chaotic mechanical forest. The entire factory operates as one single, interconnected organism, a central steam engine, housed in its own building, powers a massive drive shaft, which in turn powers every single machine through this complex system of leather belts. It is a marvel of engineering and a terrifying sight. If you get a piece of clothing or your hair caught in one of these belts, it will not stop for you. It will pull you into the machinery without hesitation. The overseer who was at the gate now stalks the aisles. He seems to be everywhere at once. His eyes miss nothing. A sleepy worker, a tangled thread, a moment of hesitation. He sees it all. You see him grab a young boy, not much older than you, by the ear and shout something that is completely lost in the noise. The boy flinches, nods frantically, and turns back to his machine, his movements now twice as fast. This is your new world. It is not a place of learning or growth. It is a place of relentless, repetitive motion, of overwhelming noise, of suffocating air, and of constant, quiet fear. You are no longer a child. You are a cog. Your job is to find your place in this giant, roaring machine and not get crushed. The initial shock is a physical and mental blow. You feel small, helpless, and utterly terrified. And the clock on the wall shows that your 16-hour day has only just begun. The overseer grabs your shoulder. His grip is like iron, and you flinch. He does not say a word, just points. He is pointing down, at the space beneath a massive, clattering power loom. Then he points to a small basket filled with fluffy, white cotton scraps. Your father, who has been assigned to a nearby spinning mule, gives you a quick, grim nod. This is it. You understand your task. You are about to enter the belly of the beast. The noise here, on the floor, is somehow even worse. It is a loud, guttural, grinding thunder that vibrates through the wooden floorboards and up into your very skeleton. You have to get down on your hands and knees. The floor is slick with oil and grease, and covered in a thick carpet of cotton dust. It immediately sticks to your hands and the knees of your thin trousers. You are being initiated into the world of the industrial machine, and it is a world that is profoundly, fundamentally alien to the human body. The machines were not designed with human operators in mind. They were designed for pure mechanical efficiency. There were no safety guards, no emergency shut-off switches, no ergonomic considerations. The fact that they required human interaction was almost an inconvenient afterthought for the engineers who built them. The people had to adapt to the machine, not the other way around. This principle of human subordination to mechanical process is a core tenet of the early Industrial Revolution, and you are feeling it in the most direct way possible. You feel a knot of fear tighten in your stomach as you look at the space you are supposed to enter. It is a dark, cramped world under the loom, a forest of iron legs, gears, inductor belts, all moving in a dizzying, relentless rhythm. The shuttle of the loom, a piece of wood tipped with metal, shoots back and forth just inches above where your head will be. It moves faster than your eye can follow. The blurry, horizontal missile. You have heard stories. You know what happens if you lift your head at the wrong moment. But the fear of the overseer is greater than the fear of the machine. You take a breath, the dusty air filling your lungs, and you crawl into the darkness. The world shrinks to this tiny, terrifying space. The roar of your loom is now your entire universe. It is so loud it feels like it is inside your skull. The air is thick and hot, smelling of hot metal and oil. Dust rains down on you from the vibrating machine above, getting in your eyes, your nose, your mouth, and so you begin your work. You scuttle around in the narrow space, like a small animal, gathering the fallen scraps of cotton and putting them in your basket. Your small size is your primary qualification for this job. An adult could not fit in here. You are nimble. You are low to the ground. And most importantly, you are cheap. This brings us to a rather depressing and quirky detail about the economics of child labor. Factory owners often justified the practice with a twisted sort of logic they called the nimble fingers argument. They claimed that children were uniquely suited for textile work because they're small. Quick fingers were better at tying broken threads and their small bodies were perfect for tasks like yours, clearing waste from under the machines. It was a convenient excuse that framed exploitation as a natural suitability. Some owners even published pamphlets praising the docility and dexterity of their child workforce. Of course, this was pure propaganda. The real reasons were economic. Children could be paid a fraction of an adult's wage. They were easier to control and intimidate, and they were a plentiful, disposable labor source. You quickly learn the rhythm of the machine. You learn to anticipate its movements, to stay low, to keep your hands and hair away from the moving parts. Every moment is a calculation of risk. If you are too slow, the waste cotton will build up and could jam the loom, a costly mistake that will earn you the wrath of the overseer. If you are too careless, the machine will take a finger, or your scalp. There is no middle ground. You see other children doing similar jobs, under the spinning mules. You see them darting in and out to piece together broken threads. The heavy carriage of the mule slides back and forth, and if they are not quick enough, they can be crushed against the frame. These accidents were horrificously common. Yet, the question of just how common is something historians still grapple with. Factories were private enterprises, and there was no legal requirement to report injuries or deaths. Overseers had every incentive to cover them up to avoid scrutiny or production stoppages. While we have anecdotal evidence from reformers, parliamentary reports, and autobiographies, the true, statistical scale of daily injury inside these mills is likely lost to history. We have the chilling stories, but the cold, hard numbers that would paint the full picture are maddeningly elusive. After what feels like an eternity, your basket is full. You crawl out, your body already aching. your knees raw. You empty the basket into a larger bin and then, without a moment's rest, you turn back to the loom. There is always more dust, always more scraps. The work is never, ever done. You are trapped in a loop. Crawl in, gather, crawl out, empty, repeat. The noise smashes your thoughts into tiny pieces. The dust clogs your throat. The fear is a constant companion. You are not thinking about the future, about what you will have for dinner, about playing games. Your entire consciousness has been reduced to this one single, repetitive task, performed under the constant threat of injury. This is the symphony of the machines, and you are just one small, terrified instrument in the orchestra. You have been at it for what feels like a lifetime, but a glance at the huge, merciless clock on the far wall shows it has only been a couple of hours. The initial shock has worn off, replaced by a dull, aching monotony. Crawl, gather, crawl out. The rhythm of the work is hypnotic, but it is the hypnosis of a nightmare. The air is the biggest enemy now. It is not just air. It is a substance. A thick, fibrous fog that you are constantly breathing. You start to cough. At first, it is a small, dry tickle in the back of your throat, but soon, it becomes a deeper, more persistent ache that shakes your small frame. You look around and see that you are not alone. Everyone is coughing. It is part of the factory's soundscape, a human counterpoint to the mechanical roar. You spit, and the phlegm that comes up is gray, threaded with tiny white fibers. You are, quite literally, breathing in the factory. This is the genesis of brown lung disease, or by cyanosis, a specific form of occupational asthma that was rampant among cotton mill workers. It is one of the most well-documented health crises of the Industrial Revolution. The cotton dust, full of bacteria and fungi, causes a chronic inflammation of the airways. In the early stages, workers would feel their chests tighten on the first day back to work after the weekend. They called it Monday fever. But for you, there is no weekend. You work 6 days a week. The inflammation never gets a chance to subside. Over time, it leads to permanent, irreversible lung damage, crippling shortness of breath, and an early death. You do not know the medical terms, but you see it in the older workers. In your father, you see them gasping for breath, their faces pale, their chests permanently heaving. You are breathing your own future. The air is filled with more than just cotton dust. To keep the cotton threads from snapping in the hot, dry air of the factory, the air itself was often artificially humidified. Steam was pumped into the room, keeping the atmosphere perpetually damp. This was not for your comfort. It was for the efficiency of the machines. The result was a hot, wet, sticky environment that was a perfect breeding ground for disease. The combination of the heat, the humidity, and the cotton dust created a uniquely toxic atmosphere that attacked the lungs from all sides. You feel a persistent itch on your arms and neck. You look down and see your skin is red and irritated. This is another gift of the factory environment. The air is full of tiny, sharp particles that settle on your skin, causing rashes and lesions. Sometimes, the raw cotton itself was treated with chemicals to make it easier to spin, and these unknown substances would add to the toxic soup you lived and worked in. And here is a rather disgusting, small detail. The factory was also teeming with lice. The close quarters, the lack of sanitation, and the fact that no one ever had a chance to properly wash themselves or their clothes meant that lice infestations were a constant, miserable reality. The itching from the dust and the itching from the lice become one and the same. a ceaseless torment. The constant dampness of the floor and air also led to a host of other health problems. Many children developed painful, swollen joints from spending their entire day on cold, wet floors. This condition was so common it was often just called factory leg. Historians and medical experts still debate the precise cocktail of factors that made the mill so uniquely unhealthy. They question if it was the dust alone, the humidity, the heat, the lack of ventilation. The truth, most now agree, is that it was a synergistic disaster. Each individual element was bad, but together, they created an environment more hostile to human health than almost any that had existed before. The debate now often centers on the degree to which factory owners were aware of the specific dangers. Some argue for ignorance, that the science of occupational health simply did not exist. Others point to evidence that owners actively resisted any attempts at ventilation or dust suppression because it would add to their costs, suggesting a conscious choice to sacrifice worker health for profit. You pause for a second, just a single second, to catch your breath and rub your itching eyes. The world under the loom is a blurry, vibrating hell. The relentless, deafening noise is starting to have a strange effect on your perception. It is no longer just a sound. It is a pressure, a physical weight pushing in on you from all sides. It feels like the air itself is vibrating, and you are vibrating along with it. You start to feel thirsty, a deep, aching thirst. Your mouth is dry and tacky from the dust, and the heat of the room is making you sweat. Even though your clothes are thin, you look around, searching for a water source. You see a large wooden barrel in a corner, with a communal ladle hanging from its side. But it is a long way away, across a treacherous landscape of roaring machines. Leaving your post, even for a moment, is a risk. But the thirst is becoming unbearable. It is a choice between two different kinds of misery. You have now been fully initiated into the sensory world of the factory. It is a world designed to break you down. Your ears are assaulted by the noise. Your lungs are choked by the dust. Your skin is irritated by the filth. And your body is already starting to fail you. You are a ghost in the machine. A small, coughing, itching creature scuttling in the darkness, breathing in the snow that never melts. And the day is still young. Your name is not your name anymore. You are scavenger, or pisar, or simply hay. You. The overseer spots you from across the floor. He does not shout. It would be useless in the den. He just points at you, then at the space under your loom, with a sharp, angry jab of his finger. You had paused for just a moment too long. Lost in the fog of thirst and exhaustion, you have been caught. You immediately duck your head and scurry back under the machine, your heart hammering against your ribs. You know what is coming. You try to make yourself smaller, to disappear into the shadows and the noise. But there is no escape. A moment later, you see his boots appear beside the loom. A hand reaches in and grabs you by the collar of your rough shirt, dragging you out from under the machine and onto your feet. He leans in close, his face just inches from yours. His breath smells of stale beer and anger. You cannot hear his words clearly over the roar, but you do not need to. The meaning is conveyed in the tightening of his grip, the fury in his eyes. You have been idle. You have been inefficient. You have wasted the factory's time, which is the factory's money. This is your first real introduction to the system of factory discipline, a core element of the Industrial Revolution. This new form of labor required a new kind of worker. Pre-industrial work, like farming or artisan crafts, often had a natural, task-oriented rhythm. You worked hard during planting season, less so in the winter. You worked until a job was done. But the factory demanded a completely different mindset. Relentless, synchronized, machine-paced labor. The old ways had to be beaten out of the workforce, and children were the most malleable subjects. The discipline was not just about punishment. It was about forging a new type of human being, one who responded to the clock and the whistle, not the sun and the seasons. His other hand comes up, and you see the leather strap. It is thick and heavy. You flinch, squeezing your eyes shut, bracing for the impact. The first blow ends across your shoulders. It is not a sting. It is a deep, searing pain that radiates through your whole body and steals your breath. He does not stop at one. Another blow, and another. You do not cry out. You have learned that making noise only seems to make it worse. You bite down hard on your lip, tasting the coppery tang of blood. The pain is white hot, but the humiliation is a cold, sickening wave that washes over you. You are being punished like an animal, in front of everyone. But no one looks. No one dares to meet your eye. They just work faster, their heads bent over their machines, pretending not to see. Their indifference is its own kind of pain. The overseer finally shoves you away. You stumble, catching yourself on the frame of the loom. Your back is on fire. You can feel the welts rising on your skin already. He points one last time to the space under the loom. A final, silent command. Get back to work. You crawl back into your dark little world, tears silently streaming down your face, mixing with the dust and grime. The physical pain is immense, but it is the psychological shock that truly settles in. You made a mistake, a tiny one, a moment of hesitation in a 16-hour day, and the response was instant, brutal, and physical. You learn a crucial lesson. There is no room for error. There is no grace. There is no understanding. The system you are in is not just demanding. It is utterly unforgiving. This is where you might encounter a particularly cruel and unusual form of punishment, a strange footnote in the history of factory cruelty, for children who were chronically drowsy or made repeated mistakes. Some overseers had more inventive methods than simple strapping. One common punishment was being weighted. An overseer would tie a heavy weight to the child's neck and make them walk up and down the factory aisles for an hour or more. A public spectacle of shame and exhaustion. It was psychological torture as much as physical. Another punishment involved dipping a drowsy child's head into the large cistern of cold water used to wash the machinery. The shock and humiliation were meant to be a powerful deterrent. Historians still debate the prevalence of these more theatrical punishments. They question if they were the daily norm, or the exceptional acts of particularly sadistic overseers, later highlighted by reformers to shock the public. The truth is likely somewhere in between. While the strap was the common currency of discipline, these more elaborate cruelties were a very real part of the toolkit of terror used to control the child workforce. You try to go back to your task, but your body is trembling. Every movement sends a fresh wave of pain across your back. Your mind is a jumble of fear and resentment. You are not just tired anymore. You are scared. A deep, primal fear that settles in your bones. You understand now that the machines are not the only danger in this place. The people in charge are just as dangerous, and far less predictable. You keep your head down, gathering the cotton scraps with frantic energy. You no longer dare to pause, not even for a second. The rhythm of your work becomes desperate, fueled by adrenaline and terror. You try to block out the pain, to block out everything, to become as mechanical as the loom above you. Because in this world, being a machine is the safest thing you can be. Being human, with human needs like rest or a moment of distraction, is a liability that gets you punished. The welts on your back are a physical reminder of your place in this world. You are small. You are powerless. And your comfort means nothing. Your only value lies in your ability to perform your task. Endlessly, without complaint or error. The first mistake has been made, and its price has been paid. You know, with a cold, terrifying certainty that it will not be your last. The throbbing pain in your back eventually subsides into a dull, persistent ache. A new layer of misery on top of the exhaustion and the hunger. You focus on your work with a new, fearful intensity. You are no longer just a worker. You are a survivor, and your world is a landscape of potential threats. The most immediate threat, you now understand, is the machine you serve. You are crawling back under your loom after emptying your basket, and your sleeve, already frayed and loose, catches on a protruding, greasy bolt on the low-lying gear. For a split second, you feel a tug, a gentle, almost insignificant pull that your new, heightened state of fear sends a jolt of pure adrenaline through you. You yanked your arm back with all your might, tearing the fabric of your shirt with a harsh rip. You are free, but your heart is pounding so hard it feels like it is trying to escape your chest. You stare at the torn sleeve, then at the slowly turning gear. It was not moving fast, but it did not need to be. The relentless, steady torque of the machine would have pulled your whole arm in, slowly and inexorably. It would not have stopped. The machine has no emergency brake, no sensor to detect a human presence. It only has one purpose: to run. This is the moment you truly comprehend the intimate, constant danger of your environment. Every single moving part around you is a hazard. The power of the Industrial Revolution was built on the transmission of force, from steam to piston, from wheel to belt, from gear to spindle. And you are a small, soft body working in the midst of this massive, unforgiving network of power. The factory is a web of traps, and you are scurrying around in the middle of it. You look around with new eyes. You see the massive leather belts that connect the overhead driver shafts to the individual machines. They slap and wear endlessly, sometimes slipping and letting out a terrifying screech. Getting caught in one of those is a death sentence. It would hoist you up, smashing you against the ceiling or other machinery before anyone could even react. You see the open, churning gears of the spinning mules, their metal teeth gnashing together, slick with grease. You see the flying shuttles of the looms, shooting back and forth like deadly projectiles. This brings us to a grim, but essential, piece of historical knowledge: the nature of common factory accidents. They were brutal and horrificously specific to the machinery. For children like you, working under the looms, being scalped was a major risk. If your hair, which was likely long and unkempt, got caught in the moving parts, it would be ripped from your head in an instant. This was so common that some of the more enlightened factory owners insisted children wear caps, not for hygiene, but for a crude form of safety. For the PSRS who mended threads on the spinning mules, losing fingers was a daily risk. They had to dart in and out of the moving machinery, and a moment's misjudgment meant crushed or severed digits. Many older workers had hands with missing fingers, a permanent badge of their trade. Being crushed by the heavy, sliding carriage of the mule was the ultimate danger of that job. And here is a small, strange detail that highlights the utter lack of a safety culture. In some early factories, workers were actually forbidden from wearing gloves. This was because gloves, it was believed, would reduce the dexterity of their fingers, making them slower at tying threads and thus less productive. The owners prioritized the microscopic efficiency gain over the very obvious safety benefit of protecting the hands of the workers. It is a perfect, if chilling, example of the era's mindset. Production over people. Always. Historians have long debated the psychology of working in such an environment. How did people manage the constant, high level of risk and fear? Did they simply become numb to it? Did they develop a kind of gallows humor? Or did they live in a state of perpetual, low-grade terror? The evidence, from memoirs and witness accounts, suggests it was a mixture of all three. Workers did become desensitized to the everyday dangers, developing a set of unconscious skills and reflexes to navigate their environment. They learned the rhythms of their machines intimately, knowing just when to duck, when to reach, when to pull back. But this numbness was a fragile defense. The sudden scream from a nearby aisle, the sight of an accident, would instantly shatter that composure and remind everyone of the razor's edge they lived on. The debate often centers on whether this environment fostered solidarity or isolation. Did the shared danger bring workers closer together? Or did the need for individual focus and the fear of making a mistake that could harm others actually drive them further apart, reinforcing the isolation created by the noise? Your near miss with the gear has taught you another lesson. You start to move differently. You become more deliberate, more conscious of every part of your body. You learn to tuck in your clothes, to keep your head low, to never, ever reach into a space without looking first. You are developing the survival skills of the factory floor. It is a form of knowledge that is not taught, but learned through fear and close calls. You are no longer just working. You are engaged in a constant, delicate dance with the machinery. It is a dance where your partner is a powerful, unthinking, and utterly indifferent giant made of iron and steam. It leads. You follow. You must anticipate its every move. Respect its power. They never, ever miss a step, because you know if you do, the dance will end. Then the machine will be the only one left on the floor. The ache in your back from the strap of the overseer is a reminder of the human threat, but the torn fabric on your sleeve is a reminder of the mechanical one. In this place, danger comes from all directions. The hours crawl by, each one a small eternity of noise, dust, and fear. The gnawing hunger in your stomach has become a dull, persistent ache. Your body is running on fumes. Then, a new sound cuts through the monotonous roar of the machinery. A loud, clanging bell. For a brief, hopeful second, your heart leaps. Is it over? But then you see the other workers. They do not stop. They just seem to slow down. A subtle shift in the factory's rhythm. The giant steam engine that powers the whole factory lets out a long, groaning hiss, and the whirring of the overhead belts begins to wind down. The machines do not fall silent. That would be too much to hope for. But their thunderous roar softens to a more manageable, though still deafening, rumble. This is the lunch break. You crawl out from under your loom for what you hope is the last time for a little while. Your knees are raw. Your back aches, and your throat feels like sandpaper. The overseer barks an order that is lost in the noise, but the meaning is clear from his gestures. You are not free to go anywhere. You are to stay by your workstation. A cart is wheeled onto the factory floor. It is a grimy, wooden thing, and on it are baskets filled with lumps of something dark and oily. This is your midday meal. A woman, her face as tired and blank as everyone else's, hands you a piece. It is an oat cake, but again, like the bread this morning, it is a sad imitation of what it should be. It is dense, greasy, and cold. It has been cooked with cheap, often rancid fat to bind it together. and it has a slightly sour taste. You get 15 minutes, not a second more. There is no designated lunchroom, no place to sit down undressed. You find a spot on the filthy floor, your back against the cold brick wall. Near your loom, you are expected to eat quickly, without fuss, and be ready to start the moment the bell rings again. This is a core concept of industrial labor, the complete monetization of time. In your pre-industrial life, a meal might have been a communal, social event. Here, it is a calculated pause in production, made as short as humanly possible. Your time is not your own. It belongs to the factory owner. Every minute you spend not working is a minute of lost profit. This idea was revolutionary and shaped the modern world. The factory did not just buy your labor. It bought your life in 15-minute increments. You bite into the oat cake. It is tough and hard to chew. Your mouth is so dry from the cotton dust that you can barely swallow. You look around for the water barrel again. Now is your chance. You get up and hurry over, joining a small crowd of other children and adults around it. The water is tepid and has a metallic taste from the barrel. There is a single, shared tin cup, greasy to the touch, hanging on a chain. You wait your turn. Take a quick, greedy gulp. The lukewarm water doing little to quench your real thirst, but at least moistening your throat enough to get the rest of the oatcake down. As you stand there, you see something that makes your stomach turn. A few feet away, a group of rats, bold and unafraid, are scurrying along the base of the wall, feasting on the crumbs and dropped pieces of food. They are fat and sleek. They look healthier than the children working beside you. This is a grim and surprisingly well documented detail of factory life. The factories, with their warmth, grain dust, and scraps of food, were a paradise for vermin. Rats and mice were a constant presence, a disgusting and unsanitary part of the ecosystem. Some factory records even show small payments made to rat catchers, an official recognition of the problem, but they were fighting a losing battle. The rats were as much a part of the factory as the machines. The history of lunch breaks themselves is a fascinating uncontested area. In the very early days of the factory system, there often was not a formal break at all. Workers were expected to eat while their machines were running, a dangerous and stressful multitasking feat. The introduction of a scheduled, factory-wide break, even a pitifully short one like this, was actually seen as a reform. However, historians debate the motive. Was it a humanitarian concession, a recognition that even human machines need refueling, or was it a purely pragmatic decision? A coordinated stop allowed for basic maintenance on the central steam engine and driver shots, and some owners realized that a worker who had at least swallowed some food was marginally less likely to collapse or make a costly mistake in the afternoon. The argument leans towards the latter. The break was not for you. It was for the machinery and the production schedule. You finish your oatcake and the last of your water. The brief respite is already over. The 15 minutes have passed in what felt like a blink. The head overseer is already stalking the aisles, his presence a clear signal that the pause is ending. You see him kick the foot of a man who had slumped against the wall. His eyes closed for just a second. The man jolts awake, fear in his eyes, and scrambles back to his station. There is no rest for the weary. The deep groan of the steam engine signals the return to work. The overhead belts begin to pick up speed, their whirring rising back to its familiar, maddening pitch. The looms, the spinners, the mules, they all roar back to life in a deafening crescendo. The brief dip in the noise is over. The full apocalypse of sound returns. You take your place back at your station. The greasy, Unsatisfying oat cake sitting like a lump of lead in your stomach. The break has not refreshed you. It has only served to highlight your profound exhaustion. It was a brief, cruel glimpse of what it feels like to stop, only to have it snatched away. The second half of your day is about to begin, and you know, somehow, that it will be even longer and harder than the first. The afternoon is a different country of tired. The brief, inadequate fuel from your oat cake has already burned away, and a new kind of exhaustion sets in. It is not the sleepy weariness of the morning. It is a deep, physical fatigue, a heaviness in your limbs that makes every movement a conscious effort. Your mind, battered by the noise and lack of sleep, begins to drift. You are on your hands and knees under the loom. The rhythmic clatter, a hypnotic, depressive lullaby. Your eyelids feel like they have lead weights attached to them. For a split second, your body betrays you. Your head nods, your chin slumps to your chest, and you fall asleep. It is not a gentle drift into slumber. It is a sudden, complete shutdown. Your mind just turns off. You are jolted awake by a searing pain in your ear. The overseer is there again. He must move like a phantom. He has dragged you out from under the machine and is twisting your ear, pulling you to your feet. The pain is sharp and nauseating. Sleeping on the job. Are we? He snarls, his voice cutting through the noise with sheer venom. You are too terrified and disoriented to even shake your head. Falling asleep was one of the most common and most severely punished offenses a child could commit in the factory. It was seen not as a natural, physiological response to extreme exhaustion, but as a moral failing, a sign of laziness and insubordination. The punishments were designed to be memorable. The strap was the standard, but as you learned it earlier, overseers often had more creative methods. He shoves you towards the center of the main aisle, into the path of the other workers. You are now a public spectacle. He wants to make an example of you. He grabs a bucket. You brace yourself for the shock of cold water, the punishment you have heard whispered about. He holds the bucket up, and for a moment, you think you see something else inside. This is where you encounter a truly bizarre and degrading piece of factory lore. In some textile mills, particularly those involved in wool processing, large tubs of stale urine were collected. In this place, urine, which contains ammonia, was a cheap and effective substance for cleaning and scouring raw wool, stripping it of its natural grease. The practice, known as bleaching, was an ancient one, but in the industrial setting, it took on a new, grim dimension. The urine was oft uncollected from the factory floor itself or bought from nearby tenements. The punishment for a drowsy child could, in the worst cases, involve being doused not with water, but with this foul-smelling liquid. It was the ultimate humiliation, a way of marking you as less than human, as waste. Fortunately for you, today, the bucket just contains water, but it is filthy, stagnant water from the machinery cistern. He dumps it over your head. The shock is breathtaking. The cold water soaks your thin shirt and trousers instantly, plastering them to your skin. It runs down your face, into your eyes, carrying grime and dust with it. You stand there, shivering, dripping, in the middle of the factory floor, while the overseer glares at you. The message is clear to everyone. This is what happens when you rest. You are now cold, wet, and humiliated. But you are awake. The shivering is violent. Then you know the dampness will not dry in this humid, steamy air. It will cling to you for the rest of the day and night, chilling you to the bone. The profound, inescapable exhaustion of the factory children is a central theme in the historical records of the time. Doctors, reformers, and even some politicians who testified in parliamentary commissions described children who were so tired they could not eat their meager suppers, falling asleep at the table or on the floor as soon as they got home. They were in a state of chronic sleep deprivation that stunted their growth, destroyed their immune systems, and left them vulnerable to every conceivable illness. There is a heartbreaking consistency in the testimonies. The image of small children, their bodies swaying with fatigue, their eyes half closed, performing repetitive mechanical tasks in a trance-like state. The academic debate here is not about whether the children were tired, but about the economic and social acceptance of this reality. How could a society, even one obsessed with progress and profit, allow this to happen on such a massive scale? Some historians argue it was a form of willful blindness. People knew, but chose to look away, convinced by the rhetoric that this was a necessary evil for national prosperity. Others argue it was a more complex failure of social imagination. In a world without a modern concept of childhood, where children of the poor had always worked in some capacity, the factory was seen by some as just a new, more intense form of that old reality. They could not yet conceive of a world where children were protected, educated, and allowed to simply be children. The idea itself had to be invented, and that was a long, slow, and painful process. The overseer gives you a final, rough shove back towards your loom. Now get back to it. Before I decide you need another waking up. You stumble back to your station, your teeth chattering from the cold. The water has plastered your hair to your scalp and is dripping down your back, making the welts from your earlier punishment sting anew. You crawl back under the machine, the damp, filthy floor feeling colder than ever against your soaked clothes. The afternoon stretches before you, a seemingly endless expanse of time. The wave of sleepiness has been replaced by a miserable, shivering alertness, but you know the exhaustion is still there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the shock of the cold water to wear off. It is a relentless tide, and you can only hold it back for so long. You are fighting a battle against your own body, a battle you are destined to lose, over and over again. The shivering from your dousing eventually subsides into a deep, internal cold. Your clothes are still damp, clinging to you like a second skin made of ice. The afternoon wears on, a blur of repetitive motion. You are a ghost under the loom, your world reduced to the small, dark space filled with the thunder of the machine. Then, you hear it. It is a sound that is different from the factory's normal symphony. It is not mechanical. It is human. A high-pitched, piercing scream, followed by a sudden, sickening crunching noise. It cuts through the din for just a second, sharp and terrible, before being swallowed again by the roar. Every head on the factory floor that is able to snaps in the direction of the sound. The spinning mules. A machine grinds to a halt with a horrible shriek of protesting metal. The overseer, who was just menacing you, is now running, his face a mask of alarm, not for the person, but for the stoppage in production. Workers from the immediate area are backing away, their faces pale with shock. You cannot see exactly what happened from your position, but you can see the aftermath unfolding. You see a small group of men gather around the base of the silent spinning mule. You see them pulling at something. You catch a glimpse of a small, still form being lifted from the machinery. It is a boy, one of the PSRS, now older than you. His arm is bent at an unnatural angle, and there is a dark stain spreading across the front of his shirt. This is the moment the abstract danger of the factory becomes terrifyingly real. It is no longer a story you have heard or a risk you have calculated. It is right there, a few yards away. You just saw this boy this morning, Another small, tired face in the crowd. Now, he is a broken doll being carried away by two men. The reaction of the factory is the most chilling part. There is no factory-wide stop. There is no call for a doctor. There is not one. The boy is simply carried out, disappearing through a side door. The overseer is already yelling at the workers near the stopped machine, urging them to clear the area. A mechanic is summoned to inspect the mule, to see what damage has been done to the precious equipment. Within 5 minutes, the immediate area is cleared. The mechanic is at work, and the overseer is shouting at everyone else to get back to their jobs. This is a core, brutal truth of the Industrial Revolution, the disposability of human life, in the cold calculus of the factory owner. You are a replaceable part, and a cheap one at that. A spinning mule is a significant capital investment, a complex piece of machinery that costs a great deal of money. A child laborer costs pennies a day. If a child is injured or killed, there is a long line of other hungry, desperate children waiting outside the factory gates to take their place. The machine is valuable. You are not. You see a woman, probably the mother of the boy, who was working at a nearby loom, try to run after the men carrying her son. The overseer steps in front of her, blocking her path. He does not touch her, but his stance is menacing. His words, though you cannot hear them, are clearly a harsh command. Her face crumples in anguish, but she turns, slowly, and walks back to her loom. She does not have a choice. If she leaves, she loses her job, and the rest of her family will starve. She has to keep working. Her grief is silent. Private agony in the midst of the roaring machines. This cold, pragmatic response to injury and death is well documented. Reformers like Lord Ashley, the Earl of Shaftesbury, collected thousands of pages of testimony detailing these accidents. One famous account tells of a girl who was scalped by a machine. The main concern of the overseer was the blood damaging the cotton threads. Another tells of a boy whose fingers were crushed. He was told to simply go home, with no medical attention or compensation. The stories are numerous and heartbreaking similar. And here we find a strange and sad quirk of the system. The concept of accident liability did not exist. If you were injured on the job, it was legally considered your own fault. The legal doctrine of the time, known as the fellow servant rule, held that an employer was not responsible for an injury if it was caused by your own negligence or the negligence of a fellow worker, since almost any accident could be blamed on a moment of inattention or a mistake by someone. The factory owner was almost always absolved of any responsibility. This is a point that legal historians still study intensely. They wonder if this legal framework was a deliberate construction to protect new industries from the costs of their dangerous practices, or if it was an archaic remnant of a pre-industrial legal system that was simply unable to cope with the new realities of factory work. The debate highlights how the law itself was slow to adapt, leaving workers with virtually no legal recourse. The sight of the boy being carried away has sent a wave of sickness through you. The greasy oat cake you ate earlier churns in your stomach. You feel a desperate need to be sick. You look around, but there is nowhere to go. You duck your head under the loom and vomit onto the filthy floor. The sour taste of it fills your mouth. There is no one to help you, no one to comfort you. You are utterly alone. The mechanic gets the spinning mule running again. The rhythm of the factory reasserts itself. The brief interruption erased. The machine is fixed. The production continues. The boy is gone. It is as if he never existed. You wipe your mouth with the back of your grimy hand and go back to your work. But something has changed. The fear is no longer a general anxiety. It is sharp, specific, and personal. You now know what the price of a mistake looks like. It is not just the strap of the overseer. It is a scream, a broken body, and then a chilling, indifferent silence. You work with a new, frantic precision, your small body trembling not from cold, but from a terror that has now been given a face. The shock of the accident has left you with a hollow, trembling feeling, but it has also sharpened your senses in a strange way. You are more aware than ever of your own body and its needs. The thirst, which you had briefly forgotten in the panic, returns with a vengeance. Your mouth is dry and foul, tasting from being sick, and your throat is raw from the dust in the bile. You need water, not just a sip, but a real drink. You look over at the water barrel. It seems 1,000,000 miles away, crossing the open factory floor. After what you have just seen, feels like crossing a battlefield. But the need for water is becoming a physical torment, a desperate, primal urge. You decide to risk it, waiting for a moment when the overseer is at the far end of the long room. You scuttle out from under your loom. You move quickly, keeping your head down, trying to make yourself as small and invisible as possible. The floor is a maze of spinning belts and churning gears. You hug the bases of the machines. Your path is zigzag of calculated risks. Finally, you reach the barrel. It is surrounded by a thin, slimy puddle of spilled water mixed with oil and dust. You grab the greasy tin cup, dip it into the barrel, and bring it to your lips. The water is tepid and has a faint, unpleasant taste of metal and algae, but it is the most wonderful thing you have ever tasted. You drink it all in one long, greedy gulp, the coolness soothing your raw throat. This simple act of getting a drink of water highlights one of the most fundamental deprivations of factory life, the lack of basic amenities. Water was provided, but it was often from a single, unsanitary source for hundreds of people. The water itself was frequently contaminated. It might be drawn from the same polluted river or canal that the factory dumped its waste into, or stored in open barrels that collected dust, debris, and bacteria. Cholera, then typhoid, deadly waterborne diseases were rampant in the industrial cities, and a contaminated factory water supply could be a major source of infection. For you, a drink of water is not just a comfort. It is a gamble with your life. As you are about to dip the cup for a second drink, you notice something that makes you pause. Tacked to the wall behind the barrel is a crudely printed sign. It is mostly words, which you cannot read, but it has a simple, stark drawing on it. A picture of a beer mug with a large X drawn through it. This is a fascinating, unquirky piece of social engineering from the era. Many early factory workers, accustomed to the rhythms of agricultural or artisanal labor, were used to drinking beer throughout the workday. It was often safer than the water and was seen as a source of calories and courage. However, factory owners quickly realized that an intoxicated workforce was an inefficient and dangerous one. Drunkenness led to mistakes, accidents, and fights. So, they launched a concerted campaign against drinking on the job. These signs were part of that effort. This movement was a precursor to the larger temperance movement and represents a key shift in social norms. The factory demanded a new kind of worker, sober, disciplined, and reliable. The right to a pint during the workday was one of the first casualties of the industrial age. The debate among historians on this topic is interesting. Was this anti-alcohol push purely about productivity and safety, a rational measure by owners to control their workforce? Or was it also part of a broader, more paternalistic effort by the rising middle class to impose their own values of sobriety and self-discipline on the unruly working classes. Some see it as a necessary step in creating a modern workforce, while others see it as another form of social control, stripping workers of one of their few remaining comforts and traditions. You finish your second cup of water, your thirst finally sated for a moment. You know you need to get back to your station before you are missed. As you turn to leave, you see a small group of older men gathered in a hidden corner behind a stack of cotton bales. They are passing around a small, flat metal flask, each one taking a quick, furtive sip before passing it on. They see you looking, and one of the men puts a finger to his lips in a silent, universal gesture. Sure, you understand immediately. They are breaking the rules. They are drinking gin or some other cheap spirit. A moment of chemical defiance against the misery of their day. You see in their faces not drunkenness, but a quiet, desperate need for a moment of escape. A brief, artificial warmth to fight off the cold, the fear, and the sheer, soul-crushing boredom of their work. You give a small, almost imperceptible nod and hurry away. You will not tell. It is a secret you now share. A tiny conspiracy of defiance in the face of the factory's totalizing control. You make it back to your loom without being seen. You crawl back into your dark, noisy world under the machine. The water in your stomach gives you a small measure of comfort. But the secret you now carry gives you something else. A tiny flicker of shared humanity. You are not just an isolated cog. You are part of a hidden world of small rebellions and shared secrets. A world that exists in the shadows of the machines. Getting a drink of water was a luxury you had to fight for. It was a risk, a journey, a brief moment of relief in an ocean of hardship. And, in the process, you learn it that even in this place of overwhelming control, human beings will always find small, quiet ways to resist, to find comfort, and to remind themselves that they are, in fact, still human. The brief comfort of the water is short-lived. The gnawing hunger returns, and the relentless noise and motion of the factory continue to grind you down. You are deep into the afternoon now, a hazy, seemingly endless stretch of time where the minutes blur together. Your movements have become automatic. Your mind a dull, empty space. The overseer is making his rounds again. He is the master of this small universe, the enforcer of its brutal laws. You watch him from the corner of your eye as you work, your fear of him a constant, low-level hum beneath the roar of the machinery. He is not just a supervisor. He is the embodiment of the factory as power. You see him stop by a loom where a girl, a little older than you, is working. She has made a mistake. A number of threads have snapped on her loom. A common enough occurrence, but one that requires immediate attention to fix. The overseer is not happy. You can see his jaw working, his face dark with anger. He shouts at her, but his words are lost. His actions, however, are perfectly clear. He points to a pillar a few feet away. Hanging on a nail is a short, thick whip made of hollow bone or hardened leather. It is called a billy roller, a tool borrowed from the wool industry, used for beating dust out of fibers. Here, it has been repurposed. It is one of the primary teaching tools of the overseer. He takes the billy roller off the nail. The girl shrinks back, her hands held up in a futile gesture of defense. He grabs her by the arm, dragging her away from her machine so he does not damage the equipment, and administers a swift, brutal series of lashes to her legs and back. She cries out, a thin, wailing sound that is barely audible over the noise. He shoves her back towards her lung. Fix it. You can lip read his command. She scrambles to repair the broken threads, her body shaking, tears streaming down her face. This is the reality of factory discipline. It was not based on encouragement or training, but on fear and physical punishment. The job of the overseer was not to teach, but to terrorize the workforce into compliance and deficiency. The tools of this terror were varied and cruel. The most common was the strap or the cane. Cheap, effective, and always at hand. But specialized tools like the billy roller were also part of the arsenal. The historical record is filled with accounts of these instruments. Parliamentary commissions in the 1832 and 1842 collected horrifying testimony from children who described being beaten with all manner of objects: straps, sticks, ropes, and even pieces of machinery like iron spindles. The goal was not just to punish a specific mistake, but to maintain a constant state of fear and anxiety. A terrified worker, the logic went, was a vigilant worker, and here is a truly strange and disturbing detail about this system of punishment. The pauper apprentice system. Many of the youngest children in the earliest factories were not free laborers in any sense. They were pauper apprentices, children who had been in the care of the parish workhouses, the parish authorities, eager to relieve themselves of the cost of caring for these orphans and destitute children, would essentially sell them into bondage to factory owners. These children were legally bound to their masters until they were 21. They lived in factory-owned dormitories, were fed and clothed by the owner, and were completely at his mercy. For these children, the abuse was often even worse, as they had no family to go home to, no one to complain to. They were, for all intents and purposes, slaves. The overseer was not just their boss, he was their jailer. The debate among historians on this topic is often about the motivation of the overseers themselves. Were they all sadistic monsters who enjoyed inflicting pain? Or were they also victims of the system, caught in a brutal middle management trap? Many overseers were paid based on the productivity of the workers under their supervision. If production dropped, their wages were docked. This created a powerful incentive for them to use any means necessary to keep the machines running at maximum speed. They were under immense pressure from the factory owners to meet quotas. This does not excuse their brutality, but it places it in a more complex context. They were the face of the factory's cruelty, but the engine of that cruelty was the relentless demand for profit from the very top. Was the overseer the villain, or just the final, visible link in a long chain of exploitation? You watch the girl at the nearby loom, her small fingers flying to fix the threads. Her movements are frantic, desperate. She knows the overseer is watching, waiting for her to finish. The other workers around her keep their heads down, their focus absolute. To interfere, to offer a word of comfort, would be to invite the wrath of the overseer upon themselves. In this environment, empathy is a dangerous liability. The overseer finishes his patrol in your section and moves on. His presence, a lingering shadow of menace. You can feel the collected sigh of relief from the workers around you, a subtle loosening of tense shoulders. The sight of the punishment has left you cold. It is another stark reminder of your powerlessness. You are not a person with rights. You are a resource to be managed. The tools of your management are not words of encouragement, but instruments of pain. You learn that the line between being a productive worker and a victim of the anger of the overseer is incredibly thin. It can be crossed in a split second, with a single snapped thread or a moment of inattention. You turn back to your work. The image of the billy roller burned into your mind. You work with renewed focus, not out of diligence, but out of fear. You are not just working to avoid a mistake. You are working to avoid the pain that you know, with absolute certainty, Buffeler. The tools of the overseer are not just for punishment. They are a constant, visible reminder of the violence that underpins this entire system. The sun, a celestial body you have almost forgotten exists, has begun its slow descent, but you would not know it. Here, in the heart of the factory, there are no windows to the outside world. The only light comes from the flickering, hissing gas lamps overhead, which cast long, dancing shadows and the harsh, yellow glare on everything. Time has lost all meaning. It is no longer measured by the position of the sun, but by the ache in your back and the growing emptiness in your stomach. You are trapped in a timeless, artificial world. The lack of natural light is disorienting. Your body's internal clock, which is naturally attuned to the cycle of day and night, is being systematically destroyed. The factory has its own time, its own seasons, its own sun. This is a deliberate feature of factory design, not an accident. Windows were often small, high up, and grimy, if they existed at all. Some factories were built with virtually no windows on the main work floors. This is a key point in understanding the psychological impact of industrial labor. By cutting workers off from the natural world, the factory owners created a totalizing environment. Inside these walls, the only reality was the reality of the machine. There were no distractions, no reminders of a life outside of work. It was a strategy to maximize focus and productivity, a form of sensory deprivation that kept you tethered to your task. Your world shrank to the loom, the spinning mule, the endless, roaring present moment. As you scuttled beneath your loom, the unchanging yellow light and the monotonous roar begin to play tricks on your exhausted mind. The shadows thrown by the machinery seem to writhe and twist like living things. The rhythmic clatter of the loom starts to sound like a distorted voice, muttering the same unintelligible word over and over again. You are so tired, so battered by the sensory overload, that your brain is starting to misfire. And here we encounter a strange and little-known phenomenon of the era, the factory ghost. The historical record contains a surprising number of folkloric accounts and whispered stories about ghosts and supernatural apparitions within the mills. Workers would speak of seeing the spirit of a child who was killed in a machine, or hearing phantom screams and whispers in the noise. These stories were often dismissed as simple superstition by the educated classes, but modern psychology might offer a different interpretation. In an environment of extreme sleep deprivation, sensory overload, and constant, high-stakes stress, it is not surprising that people would experience auditory and visual hallucinations. The brain, struggling to make sense of the chaotic input, starts to create its own patterns, its own narratives. The factory ghost was not a supernatural being. It was a psychological symptom of the factory itself. It was the rebellion of the mind against an inhuman environment. Historians who study folklore and labor history still debate the function of these ghost stories. Were they simply a way for workers to process the trauma and death that was a daily part of their lives? Or did they serve a more subversive purpose? Telling a story about a vengeful ghost who haunted a cruel overseer could be a safe way to express anger and a desire for justice that could never be voiced directly. The ghost story became a form of coded resistance, a shared narrative of a world where the injustices of the factory were punished, even if only in the supernatural realm. Your mind drifts. You start to think about the outside world, about what it must look like now. Is the sky blue? Are there birds? You try to remember what it feels like to stand in an open field, to feel a breeze on your face that does not carry the taste of coal smoke and cotton dust. The memories are faint, like a dream you cannot quite hold on to. The factory is doing its job. It is erasing the world outside. You are startled by a sudden, sharp pain in your foot. You cry out, a small yelp that is immediately lost in the noise. A piece of the moving undercarriage of the loom has scraped hard against your ankle. You were lost in your thoughts for just a second, and your foot had strayed into the path of the machinery. It is not a serious injury, just a deep, painful scrape, but it is another reminder. The moment you let your mind wander, the moment you lose your focus, the machine will punish you. You pull your foot back, biting your lip to stifle the pain. You are trapped. Your body is a prisoner of the work, and now you realize your mind is a prisoner too. You cannot afford the luxury of a daydream. You cannot allow yourself to think of home, or the sky, or anything beyond the immediate, dangerous reality of your task. To think is to be distracted, and to be distracted is to be injured. The timeless, windowless world of the factory is a powerful to love control. It disconnects you from everything that makes you human. Your connection to nature, your sense of time, your own thoughts. It forces you to become like the machine you serve, unthinking, unfeeling, and endlessly repetitive. You bend back to your work, the scrape on your ankle fresh, throbbing reminder to stay present, to stay focused. You push the thoughts of ghosts in the outside world from your mind. You empty your head of everything but the task at hand. Gather the scraps. Avoid the gears. The factory has won this round. It has not just claimed your body. It is now claiming your mind. And the long, gaslit day is still far from over. You have no idea what time it is. The gas lights have been burning for what seems like forever. Their harsh, steady glare creating a perpetual, unnatural noon. The factory has swallowed the day whole, and now it is beginning to devour the night. You know the sun must have set hours ago, but in here, nothing has changed. The roar is the same. The heat is the same. The work is the same. You are moving in a fog of pure exhaustion. Your body is a machine running on willpower alone. Every muscle aches with a deep, dull and weary pain. Your eyes burn from the dust and the strain of focusing in the poor light. Your mind is a dull, throbbing blank. You are no longer thinking. You are just doing. This is the state the factory wants you in. By human automaton. This sense of timelessness, of being trapped in an endless, unchanging present, was one of the most psychologically damaging aspects of factory work. For centuries, human life had been governed by natural rhythms, the rising and setting of the sun, the changing of the seasons, the cycle of planting and harvest. These rhythms gave life a sense of structure, of progress, of beginning undimmed. The factory destroyed that. It imposed its own rhythm, a mechanical, artificial beat that never, ever stopped. It created a single, unending work time that consumed all other forms of time. This is the foundational concept of modern industrial capitalism, the quantification and commodification of time itself. Your life was no longer measured in experiences, but in hours and minutes on the factory clock. As you work, you notice a subtle change in the air. A new smell is beginning to mix with the familiar odors of cotton and machine oil. It is a sharp, acrid, chemical smell. It is the gas from the lamps. As the night deepens outside, more lamps are lit, and the rudimentary ventilation of the factory cannot keep up. The air becomes thick and heavy with the fumes, making your eyes water and your head ache with a dull, persistent throb. And here we stumble upon a curious and dangerous piece of early industrial technology, the gas light itself. The introduction of gas lighting in the early 19th century was a revolution. It allowed factories to operate around the clock, freeing production from the limitations of daylight. It was the technology that enabled the 16-hour workday and the night shift, but it was a crude and dangerous technology. The gas was unpurified coal gas, full of impurities like sulfur and ammonia. The pipes were often leaky, and the open flame burners consumed huge amounts of oxygen while pumping out carbon monoxide and other toxic fumes. The result was an indoor atmosphere that was chronically polluted and oxygen deprived. Workers frequently complained of headaches, dizziness, and nausea, symptoms of what we would now recognize as low-level carbon monoxide poisoning. The debate among historians here is a nuanced one. Did factory owners understand the health risks of this new technology? The scientific link between gas fumes and specific illnesses was not yet well understood. However, the immediate, unpleasant effects, the smell, the headaches, the breathing difficulties, were impossible to ignore. Some historians argue that owners, blinded by the immense productivity gains offered by 24-hour operation, simply chose to accept these unpleasant effects as a necessary cost of doing business. Others suggest that the workers themselves, desperate for employment, had little power to complain. The choice was often between a dangerous job and no job at all. The gaslight stands as a perfect symbol of industrial progress, a brilliant innovation that brought with it the dark and dangerous shadow. The world outside your factory walls has gone to sleep. The streets are quiet. People are in their homes, in their beds. But your world roars on. The factory is a self-contained universe, an island of relentless activity in a sea of darkness and silence. This creates a profound sense of isolation. You are part of a separate, nocturnal society, a tribe of the exhausted who toil while the rest of the world rests. You see an older man at a nearby machine stumble, his body swaying with fatigue. He catches himself on the frame of his loom, his eyes closing for just a second. The overseer is at the other end of the floor, and for a moment, no one in authority is watching. Another worker, a woman, quickly steps over and gives the man's shoulder a gentle shake. He jolts awake, looks at her, and gives a small, grateful nod. It is a tiny, fleeting moment of solidarity, a quiet act of mutual support in the face of shared exhaustion. It is in these small, almost invisible moments that the humanity of the workers survives. The factory is designed to isolate you, to turn you into an individual competing for survival. But these tiny acts of kindness, of watching out for one another, are a form of resistance. They are a refusal to be completely dehumanized, a quiet insistence that you are all in this together. You continue your work, the gaslight hissing above you, the acrid fumes burning your throat. The sunset came and went without you. The moon has risen, but you cannot see it. You are a creature of this artificial world, a child of the gaslight and the steam engine. The natural cycles of the planet have been replaced by the mechanical cycle of the factory. You are lost in time, adrift in a sea of noise and labor. With hours still to go before the final bell offers its brief, merciful release, the factory at night is a different kind of monster. The darkness outside, glimpsed only as a black void through the grim ice of the high windows, makes the gaslit interior feel even more intense, more isolated. It is a bubble of hellish light and noise floating in a silent, sleeping world. The air, already thick with dust and steam, now carries the heavy, greasy scent of the gaslight, a smell that coats the back of your throat. You have been on your feet, or on your knees, for more than 12 hours. Your body has gone past aching and has entered a state of numb, mechanical endurance. But your mind is starting to fray at the edges. The constant, unchanging roar of the machinery, which had faded into a background drone, is starting to morph and change in your perception. The rhythmic clack, 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 clack of your loom no longer sounds like a machine. In your exhausted state, it begins to sound like a giant, distorted voice, whispering a sinister, repetitive chant. You cannot make out the words, but the tone is menacing. You shake your head, trying to clear it, but the auditory illusion persists. This is the point in your day where profound fatigue begins to induce mild psychosis. It is a well-documented phenomenon. When the brain is deprived of sleep and subjected to relentless, monotonous sensory input, it starts to create its own reality. The barrier between the real and the imagined begins to break down. You are not going crazy. You are just a human mind being pushed far beyond its biological limits. You risk a glance around the factory floor. In the flickering, unreliable light of the gas lamps, the machines themselves seem to take on a life of their own. The massive, slowly turning flywheels look like giant, sightless eyes. The moving arms of the spinning mules look like skeletal limbs, reaching and retracting in a grotesque, endless dance. The whole factory has become a landscape of waking nightmares. And here we encounter a very specific and peculiar set of beliefs from this time. The idea of machine animism. It was not a formal religion, but a widespread, superstitious undercurrent among the first generation of factory workers. Many of these people had come from rural, pre-industrial communities where folklore and superstition were deeply ingrained. They were thrust into a world of machines whose power was almost magical, whose workings they did not fully understand. It is not surprising that they began to attribute a kind of malevolent life or spirit to the machines. They would talk about certain looms being unlucky or cursed. They might leave small offerings, like a piece of bread, near a troublesome machine, a folk ritual transplanted from the field to the factory floor. They spoke of the machines as if they were living beings that needed to be appeased. Historians who study the cultural impact of industrialization find this fascinating. Was this simply the dying gasp of old-world superstition in a new, rational age? Or was it a deeply human way of trying to make sense of an overwhelming and terrifying new reality by giving the machine a spirit, even a malevolent one? Workers could create a narrative around their suffering. It was not just a random, uncaring piece of iron that took the finger of your friend. It was a hungry, angry machine. This animistic worldview, while not rational, provided a psychological framework for coping with the constant danger and powerlessness they experienced. The debate continues. Was it a sign of ignorance, or a sophisticated, if unconscious, psychological coping mechanism? A sudden, jarringly loud bang echoes from the other side of the room, followed by a shower of sparks. A leather doctor belt, old and frayed, has snapped under the strain. It whips through the air like a striking snake before falling limp. The machine it was powering grinds to a sudden, screeching halt. The effect is instantaneous and deeply unsettling. A pocket of silence has been created in the ocean of noise. The absence of the roar of the machine is more shocking and noticeable than the sound itself was. Everyone in the vicinity flinches, their bodies so accustomed to the constant vibration that its sudden cessation feels like a physical blow. The overseer is there in a flash, not with a strap, but with a look of pure fury at the lost production. He bellows for the mechanic. Workers in the immediate area stop, their faces a mixture of fear and a strange, guilty relief. A broken machine means a few precious, unscheduled minutes of standing still, but it also means the anger of the overseer is now focused on their section of the floor. A dangerous and unpredictable spotlight. You watch as the mechanic, the grimy, hardened man, arrives with his tools. He works with a practiced, sullen efficiency, ignoring the impatient glares of the overseer. For you, this brief, chaotic interruption is a strange sort of break. It shatters the hypnotic rhythm of your work, pulling your frayed mind back from the brink of hallucination. The sight of the broken belt, the angry overseer, the silent machine, it is all real, and it is a grim sort of anchor in the sea of your exhaustion. You realize that you have come to fear the silence as much as the noise. The noise is your normal. It is the sound of work, of survival. Silence means something has gone wrong. It means a breakdown, an accident, a disruption. It means an overseer's rage. The mechanic finishes his work. A new belt is fitted. The overseer gives a sharp command. Then the machine roars back to life. The pocket of silence stitched up as if it had never been. The rhythm of the factory is restored. You turn back to your own loom. The phantom whispers and menacing shapes momentarily banished by the real-life drama. But the deep, profound fatigue is still there. A fertile ground for the ghosts in the hum of the machine to return. The night is dark. The hours are long, and your mind is a fragile thing in this place of iron and fire. The drama of the broken belt has passed, and the factory has settled back into its monotonous, thundering rhythm. The night deepens. You are now in the final stretch of your workday. But these last few hours are a unique form of torture. Your body has given everything it has to give. Your energy reserves are not just depleted. They are a distant memory. Every movement is a triumph of will over screaming muscles and a foggy, exhausted brain. This is the time of day when accidents spike. The records, though incomplete, are clear on this. The vast majority of injuries occurred in the last 2 or 3 hours of the long shift. Reaction time slow. Judgment becomes clouded. And a moment of fatigue-induced carelessness can lead to a lifetime of disfigurement. The overseers know this, and they have a solution. Their solution is not to let you rest. It is to increase the pressure. The overseer, his face grim in the gaslight, seems to be more active, more menacing than before. He stalks the aisles with a new intensity, his eyes scanning for any sign of slowing down. He knows you are all at your breaking point, and his job is to push you past it. The shouting becomes more frequent, the prodding with the end of his cane more insistent. This is the final, brutal squeeze to extract the last possible ounce of productivity before the bell. You are struggling to keep up. Your hands, usually nimble, feel clumsy and slow. You fumble a handful of cotton scraps, dropping them back onto the greasy floor. You have to gather them all over again. Your movements sluggish, your back protesting with a fresh wave of pain. You feel the eyes of the overseer on you, and you force your tired body to move faster, fueled by a surge of pure fear. This practice of intensifying pressure at the end of a shift is a cornerstone of what historians call industrial discipline. It was a cruel but effective strategy. The logic was simple. The fear of immediate physical punishment had to be greater than the overwhelming need of the body for rest. It was a battle of stimuli, and the job of the overseer was to ensure that fear was the stronger force. Tyndale, a particularly grim and peculiar tactic used by some overseers, comes into play. Finding you are paid by the day, a pitifully small amount, but that pay is not guaranteed. Overseers had the authority to impose on-the-spot fines for a whole host of infractions. A fine for talking, a fine for being dirty, a fine for leaving your station without permission, a fine for insubordination, which could mean anything the overseer wanted it to mean, and, most commonly, a fine for being too slow. At the end of the day, when you were at your most vulnerable, the threat of fines was used as a powerful weapon. A few pennies docked from your wages could mean the difference between your family having a loaf of bread for tomorrow or having nothing. You see it happen to the man at the machine next to yours. The overseer stops, points at the output of the man, says something sharp and angry, and then makes a note in a small, grimy book. The man's shoulders slump in defeat. He has just been fined. He has not only endured a day of hellish labor, but he will also not even receive the full, meager payment for it. He works with a renewed, desperate energy, his face a mask of quiet despair. The truck system was an even more insidious version of this economic control. In many factory towns, workers were not paid in cash at all. They were paid in tokens or credit that could only be spent at the company store, which was, of course, owned by the factory owner. The owner would sell low-quality goods at inflated prices, ensuring that a large portion of the wages of the workers flowed right back into his own pockets. This system created a cycle of debt and dependency, tying the workers to the factory as effectively as any physical chains. The historical debate around these practices is intense. Were systems like fining and the truck system a deliberate, cynical strategy of exploitation, designed to maximize profit and control, or were they, as some contemporary defenders argued, a necessary tool for managing unreliable and undisciplined workforce? Most modern historians lean heavily towards the former, seeing these systems as clear evidence of the power imbalance and the exploitative nature of early industrial capitalism. They were not just about discipline. They were about squeezing every last drop of value from the worker, both through their labor and through their wages. The final hour is the longest hour of the day. It stretches into an eternity. The factory seems to get hotter, the noise louder, the air thicker. It is a collective hallucination of misery. Your mind is playing a single, repeating loop. Just a little longer. Just keep moving. Do not make a mistake. It is a mantra of survival. You focus on a single point on the machine in front of you, a greasy bolt, and make it the anchor for your entire consciousness. You block out the pain, the hunger, the exhaustion. You block out the fined man beside you, the angry overseer behind you. There is only the bolt. There is only the work. This is the final test of the day, a test of pure, unthinking endurance. It is not about skill or strength anymore. It is about the raw, animal ability to keep going. One more minute, one more motion. When every cell in your body is screaming at you to stop, the final hour is not just the end of the workday. It is the crucible where the human spirit is pushed to its absolute breaking point, and the bell has still not rung. And then, it happens. The sound you have been praying for, dreaming of, for what feels like your entire life. A bell, somewhere high above the factory floor, begins to ring. A deep, clangorous, beautiful sound that cuts through the roar of the machinery like a blade of hope. The bell. For a moment, nobody moves. It is as if the sound is too good to be true, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But it continues to ring, steady and insistent. Then, with a collective, groaning sigh, the great steam engine begins to power down. The whirring of the overhead belt slows. The thunder of the loom softens. The chattering of the spindles fades. The noise does not stop, but it recedes, like a monstrous tide going out. The silence that rushes in to fill the space is profound, a physical presence that makes your ears ring. The workday is over. You do not feel a surge of joy or relief. You are too tired for that. The feeling is more like a slow, painful awakening from a long nightmare. The adrenaline that has been keeping you going fueled by fear and the constant pressure of the overseer, drains away, leaving you with the full, crushing weight of your 16 hours of labor. You push yourself to your feet. Your legs are stiff and tremble uncontrollably. Your back is a landscape of pain, from the welts of the strap to the deep ache in your muscles. You stand there for a moment, swaying slightly. Your body is stranger to you. The other workers are moving, but slowly, like figures in a dream. They gather their meager belongings. A gap, a small bundle. Their movements stiff and clumsy. Their faces, illuminated by the still hissing gas lights, are hollow-eyed, gray with dust and fatigue. There are no smiles, no triumphant we made it glances. There is only a shared, silent, profound exhaustion. This is the moment you see the true, cumulative cost of the day. It is written on every face, in every slumped posture. The factory has taken everything from them. It has consumed their energy, their health, their time, and left behind these empty, hollowed-out shells. This is a key historical point often overlooked in grand narratives of industrial progress. The end of the workday was not a moment of liberation. It was simply a pause in the process of being consumed. The workers were not free when they left the factory. They were just temporarily released, sent out to recover just enough to be able to return the next day. The influence of the factory extended far beyond its walls, dictating the rhythm and quality of their entire existence. You join the slow, shuffling procession heading for the exit. It is the same river of people from this morning, but now the current is sluggish, weary. As you pass the overseer, who stands by the door to make sure no one is stealing anything, you do not meet his eye. You just keep your head down and keep moving. You emerge from the factory gates and the night air hits you. It is cold, and the sudden change in temperature makes you shiver violently. But it is also fresh, or at least fresher than the toxic soup you have been breathing all day. You take a deep breath, and even though it is laced with the city's coal smoke, it feels like the purest air you have ever tasted. It does not have the smell of oil, of steam, of gaslight fumes. It is the smell of the world outside, and it is a small, quiet miracle. But this is where you encounter a final, strange danger of the factory day, the knockout. This was a term used by workers for the phenomenon of suddenly collapsing from exhaustion and the shock of the cold air immediately after leaving the hot, stuffy factory. It was particularly common among the children. Their small bodies, pushed to the absolute limit, would simply give out once the immediate threatened structure of the factory environment was removed. A child might walk a few hundred feet from the gate and then just fall to the ground, unconscious. If they were alone, they might lie there for hours, at risk of exposure or being robbed of their meager pay. Historians debate how this was perceived at the time. Were these collapses seen as a medical crisis, or were they just another accepted, if tragic, feature of industrial life? The lack of official records makes it hard to say, but anecdotal evidence suggests it was common enough to be given its own slang term. It stands as a testament to the sheer, brutal extremity of the labor that was being demanded of these children. You feel a wave of dizziness wash over you. The world tilts for a second. The sudden silence is disorienting, and your body is protesting its release from the rigid structure of the workday. You lean against the cold brick wall of the factory for a moment, taking deep breaths, fighting to stay upright. You are not just tired. You are depleted on a cellular level. The bell has rung. The work is done, but the factory is not finished with you yet. It has inflicted its wounds, and now you must carry them home through the darkened, silent streets. The brave, beautiful sound of the bell was not an ending. It was just the signal for the next stage of your survival to begin. The dizziness passes, leaving a hollow, trembling weakness in its place. Your father finds you, his hand on your shoulder a familiar, heavy weight. He does not speak. His face, etched with lines of exhaustion in the dim light of the distant street lamps, says everything. It is time to go home. The walk back is the mirror image of the morning's procession, but slower, more ragged. You are a little ghost, haunting the deserted, cobblestoned East streets. Each step is an effort. Your shoes, which seemed merely uncomfortable this morning, now feel like instruments of torture, rubbing against the raw skin on your heels. You drag your feet, your body a dead weight that your will is forcing onward. The city at night is a different world. The main streets are still lit by gaslight, but the smaller alleys and courtyards are plunged into an almost total darkness. It is a landscape of deep shadows and sun, unsettling noises, the scuttling of a rat, the distant cry of a drunkard, the creak of a shutter in the wind. You stay close to your father, the fear of the dark adding another layer to your exhaustion. This walk home through the unlit, unpoliced streets of the industrial city was a significant danger in itself, for women and children especially. It was a time of vulnerability. Robbery was common. The gar-rotting panics of the mid-19th century, where newspapers reported widespread attacks by street criminals who would strangle their victims from behind, were a reflection of a very real public fear. While the scale of these attacks was often exaggerated by the press, the danger of street crime was a constant anxiety for the working poor, who had to travel to and from work in the dark. This is a key part of the survival challenge that extends beyond the factory walls. Your day does not end when the bell rings. You still have to navigate a hazardous urban environment to get to the relative safety of your home. There is no safe time of day for you. As you shuffle along, you Passage Inn Palace. It is one of the few places that is still brightly lit and full of noise. Light and raucous laughter spill out from its ornate doors. You see men and some women, their faces flushed, their voices loud, finding a loud, chemical solace at the bottom of a glass. For a brief moment, you can almost understand the appeal. It is a place of warmth and light and forgetting, a stark contrast to the cold, dark, silent world you are moving through. This brings up a fascinating and controversial piece of social history: the role of the pub, or gin palace, in working class life. For many social reformers and middle class observers, these places were ends of inequity, the source of all social problems. They blamed alcohol for poverty, crime, and the breakdown of the family. But for many workers, the pub was the only well-lit and sociable space available to them. Their homes were cold, dark, and overcrowded. The pub offered a brief escape, a place of community and camaraderie. It was the working man's living room. The historical debate is a vigorous one. Were pubs a destructive force that trapped people in a cycle of poverty? Or were they a vital social institution that provided comfort and community in an otherwise bleak existence? The truth is likely that they were both. For some, they were a path to ruin. For others, they were an essential coping mechanism, a place to feel human for a few hours. The intense moral condemnation of drinking from the middle and upper classes often failed to recognize the profound misery from which people were seeking to escape. You have no interest in the gin palace. The thought of noise and crowds is unbearable. All you want is silence. All you want is to lie down. You finally reach your tenement building. The courtyard stinks, as it always does. You climb the dark, rickety stairs, your hand on the same sticky wall. your legs protesting every step. Your father fumbles with the latch on the door, and you step inside. The room is dark and cold. The fire in the hearth is long dead. Your mother is asleep on her pile of rags, with your younger siblings curled up beside her. You have to step carefully to avoid treading on them. There is no welcome home, no warm meal waiting. The day ends as it began, in darkness and cold. You are home, but it does not feel like a sanctuary. It just feels like a slightly less terrible version of the world outside. It is a cold, cramped space where you are granted a few hours of unconsciousness before you have to return to the real center of your life. The factory. You have survived the walk home. You have navigated the dark streets and the temptations and dangers they hold. You have reached your final destination for the day. But the journey has taken its toll. You are the small, shivering, exhausted creature, standing in the dark, wondering how you will ever find the strength to do it all again tomorrow. You are finally home, but the day's trials are not quite over. Your father manages to light a single, sputtering tallow candle. Then its weak, flickering light. The small room looks even more pathetic and grim. He hands you a small slip of paper that the pay clerk gave him as you left the factory. It is your wage ticket. You cannot read the numbers, but your father can. He squints at it, his face grim. He tells you the total. It is a pitifully small sum for two people's combined 32 hours of brutal labor. But it is even smaller than it should be. The fines of the overseer have been deducted. The fine for you falling asleep. The fine for the man next to you working too slowly. It is all there. A permanent record of your failures. This is the moment the economic reality of your situation hits you with its full force. You have endured 16 hours of noise, danger, and misery. You have traded a piece of your health, your safety, and your childhood. And for what? For a handful of coins that will barely be enough to pay the rent and buy the same wretched food that will fail to give you the strength to do it all again. It is a closed loop of exploitation. You work to earn money to buy food to have the energy to go back to work. There is no surplus, no savings, no hope of advancement. This system of payment and fines was a critical element of labor control. The wages were kept deliberately low, just enough to ensure survival, but never enough to allow for escape. This is what economic historians call the iron law of wages, a theory popularized by thinkers like David Ricardo, which argued that wages for the working class would naturally tend toward the minimum level needed for subsistence. While the law itself is debated, its practical application was a reality for millions. Factory owners understood that a desperate workforce was a compliant workforce. If you were always just one day's pay away from starvation, you were less likely to complain, to strike, or to quit. Your father hands you your share. It is a couple of small, heavy copper coins. You hold them in your hand. They are still warm from his grasp. They feel pathetic, an insult. This is the monetary value of your day. This is what you are worth. And here you encounter one of the strange, quirky aspects of 19th century currency. Your pay might not even be an official royal mint currency. In the early, chaotic days of the Industrial Revolution, there was a chronic shortage of small denomination coins. To get around this, many factory owners, mining companies, and merchants minted their all-rate tokens. These were unofficial coins, usually made of copper or bronze, that could be used to pay workers and were accepted in local shops, especially the company store. These tokens were a physical manifestation of the power of the factory. The owner did not just control your labor, He controlled the very money you used. Collecting these tokens is now a niche hobby, but at the time, they were a controversial and often exploitative practice, as their value could fluctuate and they were often useless outside of the immediate town. The debate among economic historians about these tokens is lively. Were they a pragmatic solution to a genuine currency shortage, a necessary lubricant for local economies? Or were they another cynical to love the truck system, designed to trap workers in a closed economic loop where the owner controlled both wages and prices? The answer is probably a bit of both, depending on the specific time and place. But for you, the worker, it was just another reminder of who held all the power. You stare at the coins in your small, grimy palm. You do not feel a sense of accomplishment. You feel a profound sense of injustice. A deep, cold anger that is too vast and too tiring to even express. What can you do with this? What can it buy? A few oatcakes. A bit of bread, likely cut with chalk. It cannot buy back the hours you lost. It cannot heal the welts on your back or the scrape on your ankle. It cannot erase the image of the boy being pulled from the machine. It is, you realize, almost nothing. You are a child, but this is a brutally adult lesson in economics. You are learning about labor, capital, and exploitation, not from a book, but from the raw, painful experience of your own life. You are a line item on a balance sheet, a cost to be minimized, a resource to be exploited until you are used up. You clench your small hand around the coins, the metal edges digging into your skin. This is the price for surviving the day. It feels less like a reward and more like a brand, marking you as the property of the factory. You have been paid, and the price you paid was far higher. Your father points to the corner where a bucket of water and a small piece that soaks it. It is your mother's one insistence. You must wash before you sleep, but the thought of it fills you with a new kind of dread. You are so profoundly tired that even the simple act of taking off your filthy clothes and washing your face feels like a monumental task. This is a level of exhaustion that is hard to comprehend. It is not just being sleepy. It is a complete shutdown of the will. Your body has been running on empty for hours, and now that the stimulus of the factory and the walk home is gone, it is presenting you with the bill, and the bill is a debt of energy so massive you do not know how you will ever repay it. You look over at your mother and siblings, already asleep. They did not even stir when you came in. Their sleep was heavy, absolute. You envy them. You crave that same oblivion. But first, you have to eat. Your mother, with what little energy she had after her own day of mending clothes or taking in laundry, has left out your supper. It sits on a wooden plank near the hearth. It is the same as breakfast. A bowl of thin, gray gruel, another chunk of hard, dark bread. You sit on the floor, the bowl in your lap. You lift the spoon to your mouth, but the thought of eating is almost nauseating. You are too tired to be hungry. Your stomach, after the churning anxiety of the day and the brief, violent sickness, feels tight and unwelcome pain. Chewing the hard bread requires an amount of energy you simply do not have. This phenomenon of being too tired to eat is a consistent and heartbreaking detail in the historical accounts of child laborers. Doctors and reformers who interviewed them noted that many children, upon returning home, would simply fall asleep at the table, their supper untouched. Their bodies were so desperate for rest that the need for sleep overrode the need for food. This, of course, created a vicious cycle. They would go to bed without replenishing their energy, only to wake up even weaker and less prepared for the next day's labor. It was a downward spiral of malnutrition and exhaustion from which there was no escape. You force yourself to take a few spoonfuls of the gruel. It is cold and tasteless. You gnaw on the bread for a minute before giving up. Your jaw aching. It is no use. Your body is rejecting the fuel it so desperately needs. This is a point where historical nutrition and social history intersect. The diet of the urban poor during the Industrial Revolution was not just meager. It was catastrophically monotonous. It consisted almost entirely of bread, potatoes, oat, and on rare occasions, a bit of bacon or cheese. Fresh vegetables and fruits were expensive luxuries. This lack of dietary diversity led to widespread vitamin deficiencies. Scurvy, a vitamin C deficiency, which we usually associate with sailors, was surprisingly common in the industrial slums, leading to bleeding gums and joint pain. Pellagra, a niacin deficiency, caused skin lesions and dementia. The historical debate here often revolves around the potato. The potato was the wonder food of the early industrial age. It was cheap, calorie-dense, and easy to grow in small plots. For many families, it was the only thing standing between them and starvation. Some historians argue that the potato, despite its nutritional limitations, was the fuel that powered the Industrial Revolution, allowing a massive urban workforce to survive on incredibly low wages. Others argue that this over-reliance on a single crop was a disaster waiting to happen, as tragically demonstrated by the Irish potato famine, and that it masked a deeper crisis of malnutrition by providing calories without essential nutrients. Was the potato a savior or a crutch that enabled a fundamentally unhealthy system to persist? You push the bowl away. Defeated, you have not eaten more than a few mouthfuls. The very act of digestion seems like an impossible effort. All you want is the oblivion of sleep. You look at your pathetic pile of straw and drags in the corner. It does not look inviting. It just looks like a place to lie down for a few hours before the whole nightmare starts again. There is no sense of comfort, no feeling of ending the day in a safe and peaceful space. The bedroom is not a sanctuary. It is simply a charging station for the human batteries of the factory. You are trapped in a biological paradox. You are starving, but you are too tired to eat. You are filthy, but you are too tired to wash. Your body is crying out for the very things you are too exhausted to provide it with. The factory has not just stolen your day. It has broken the fundamental rhythms of your own biology. It has driven you to a state where even the most basic acts of self-preservation feel like impossible burdens. You have survived the factory, but now you must survive the peace that follows. You give up on the food and the idea of washing. The pull of sleep is an irresistible physical force. Like gravity, you stumble over to your corner. The few coins of your wages still clutched in your hand. You do not even have the energy to properly undress. You just kick off your stiff, painful shoes and collapse onto the pile of straw and drags. The straw is scratchy against your skin. The rags smell of dampened dust and sweat. It is not a bed. It is a nest of misery. But you do not care. The moment your head hits the lumpy surface, the world begins to dissolve. You are plunging into sleep, but it is not a peaceful descent. It is a heavy, leaden fall into a dark, dreamless pit. This is not the restorative, REM, cycle sleep of a healthy person. This is the sleep of total physical and mental exhaustion. It is a temporary death, and this is a key point that sleep scientists and historians have come to understand. The kind of sleep you are getting is almost as damaging as the lack of it. It is likely to be filled with micro-awakenings caused by pain, hunger, cold, and the noises of the overcrowded room. The cough of your father, a sibling's whimper, the scuttling of rats in the walls. You might be unconscious for a few hours, but your body and brain are not truly recovering. You are not healing. You are just paused. This lack of restful sleep had profound, long-term consequences. For children, it stunted physical growth because growth hormone is primarily released during deep sleep. It crippled the immune system, making them incredibly susceptible to the diseases that festered in the slums. Tuberculosis, typhoid, scarlet fever. It also had a devastating impact on cognitive development. A brain that never gets to properly rest and process information cannot learn, cannot develop. The factory did not just steal your childhood. It stole your potential to ever become a fully healthy, fully realized adult. As you lie there, on the precipice of unconsciousness, you are aware of the sounds of the room. Your father is still awake. You can hear him moving around, a quiet, restless presence in the dark. You hear the clink of a bottle. He is taking a sip of the cheap gin he keeps for moments like this. It is his own form of anesthetic against the pain and the hopelessness of his life. His brown lung is acting up, and the alcohol helps to quiet the deep, rattling cough for a little while, allowing him to find his own brief, troubled sleep. This brings us to a small, sad detail of domestic life for the poor: the use of opiates. While your father might use gin, it was incredibly common for mothers to use opiate-based soothing syrups on their infants and young children. Products with names like Godfrey's Cordial or Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup were sold cheaply and legally. They were a mixture of Sir, a port Rical and laudanum, an opium tincture. A spoonful would quiet a crying baby, allowing a desperate, overworked mother to get some rest or finish her piecework. Of course, these syrups were highly addictive and often lethal in incorrect doses. Many infants died from accidental overdoses. It was a quiet, hidden epidemic born of desperation. The historical debate here was charged with emotion and hindsight. Were these mothers willfully poisoning their children, as some sensationalist middle-class reformers claimed? Or were they victims of a system that offered them no support, no child care, and no other way to cope with an impossible situation? Most modern historians argue for the latter, seeing the use of these cordials not as an act of malice, but as a tragic, desperate measure in a world that offered no better solutions. It was a choice between a drugged, quiet baby and a household that would collapse under the strain. You are not given any syrup. You are old enough now that your exhaustion is its own sedative. The last thing you are aware of is the persistent ache in your body. It is a dull, full-body throb, a physical memory of every moment of the day. It is in the welts on your back, the scrape on your ankle, the raw skin on your knees, the deep, cellular fatigue in your muscles. Your body is a map of the day's suffering. And then, nothing. The world vanishes. There are no dreams. There is no sense of peace or rest. There is only a deep, black, bottomless void. You have fallen into the merciful blankness of unconsciousness. You are not dreaming of a better life, of playing in fields, of a warm meal. The factory has even chased you here, into the last refuge of your own mind. It has so exhausted you that you are even too tired to dream. You are asleep, but you are not resting. You are just waiting for the sound that will inevitably come in just a few short hours. The sound of the pull of the knocker-up, tapping on the window. The sound that will signal the start of another day. Exactly the same as the one you have just, somehow, survived. Your journey through a single day as a factory child is complete. You were woken in darkness, fed a pitiful meal, and marched to a monstrous building that assaulted your senses and endangered your life at every turn. You were disciplined with violence, paid with a pittance, and pushed to the absolute limit of human endurance. You survived. You made it back to your cold, dark room and fell into a sleep so profound it was like a temporary death. But here is the final, crushing truth. You would not have lasted a day, because a day is the wrong way to think about it. The true horror of this existence was not the single, terrible day. It was the repetition. It was the knowledge, as you collapsed onto your straw mattress, that tomorrow would be exactly the same, and the day after that, and the day after that. There was no weekend to look forward to in the modern sense. Sunday was often the only day off, and it was spent in a state of exhausted collapse, not recreation. There was no summer vacation. There was no prospect of a different job. There was no hope of education leading to a better life. This was your life, a relentless, soul-crushing loop of labor and exhaustion, from the moment you were old enough to be useful until the moment your body broke down and you were discarded. This is what you would have to face when the knocker-up tapped on your window in a few hours. Not just another day of work, but the terrifying reality of 1,000 more days just like it, stretching out before you in an unbroken, monotonous line. This is the point where the historical survival challenge transforms from a physical test into a psychological one. Could you endure the physical hardship for a single day? Perhaps. But could you endure the hopelessness? Could you wake up every morning knowing that this was your entire future? This is the question that truly defines the experience. The system was designed to extinguish hope, the low wages, the company store, the lack of education, the constant threat of unemployment. It all worked together to create a trap from which there was virtually no escape. You were born into this system, and you were expected to die in it. And here we encounter a crucial and often misunderstood piece of labor history, the very beginnings of organized resistance. It did not start with grand, unified trade unions as we know them today. It started with small, desperate, and often secret acts. It started with workers deliberately slowing down their machines in unison when the overseer was not looking. A practice known as a go slow. It started with the circulation of illegal, unstamped newspapers that printed stories of injustice and called for reform. It started with secret societies and combinations. The early word for unions, where workers would meet in secret in the back rooms of pubs to swear oaths of solidarity and plan for collective action. These early attempts at organization were brutally suppressed. The Combination Acts of 1799 and 1800 made it illegal for workers to combine to demand higher wages or better conditions. Men who tried to organize were arrested, imprisoned, or even transported to penal colonies like Australia. The power of the state and the factory owners was aligned against them. The historical debate here is about the effectiveness and nature of this early resistance. Some historians argue that these small acts were largely futile, doing little to change the overwhelming power structure of industrial capitalism. They see the real change as coming later, from middle-class reformers, parliamentary investigations, and a slow shift in public consciousness. Others argue that these small, secret acts of defiance were critically important. They kept the spirit of resistance alive. They built the networks of trust and solidarity that would eventually blossom into the powerful trade union movements of the later 19th and 20th centuries. They were the seeds from which real change would eventually grow. Was it the work of philanthropists in Parliament or the secret oaths in pub backrooms that truly began to turn the tide? The answer is likely both. A complex dance between pressure from above and pressure from below. So, when you wake up for your second day, you would face a choice. Do you submit completely, becoming the unthinking automaton the factory wants you to be. Do you seek escape in the fleeting oblivion of Jin? Or do you find that tiny, ember-like spark of defiance? Do you whisper a word of support to the boy next to you? Do you share a piece of your bread? Do you listen to the hushed talk of a secret meeting? These choices seem small, almost insignificant in the face of the giant, roaring machine of the factory, but they were the only choices available. And in them lies the difference between mere survival and the beginning of a fight for a better life. You would not have lasted a day, not because you are weak, but because you are a modern person who expects things like hope, dignity, and a future. Your greatest liability in this world would not be your physical body, but your 21st century mind. You would be broken not by the labor, but by the sheer, grinding, unending hopelessness of it all. The real challenge was not surviving the day. It was surviving the life. Let us zoom out for a moment. From the cold floor of your tenement room to the grand stage of history, your single, miserable day was not an isolated event. It was one experience among millions, repeated day after day, year after year, in the sprawling industrial cities of Britain, in Manchester, in Leeds, in Glasgow. You were part of a vast, unprecedented social and economic transformation, the Industrial Revolution. And this revolution, like all revolutions, was built on sacrifice. You were the sacrifice. The world you inhabit was made possible by the suffering of children like you. The cheap, mass-produced textiles from your factory clothed the world and created immense fortunes. This wealth funded the expansion of the British Empire. It built railways, ships, and cities. It powered innovations in science and technology. The very foundations of our modern consumer society were laid during this period, and they were laid on the bedrock of child labor. This is the great, uncomfortable paradox of the Industrial Revolution. It was a period of incredible progress and innovation, a moment when humanity unlocked new powers to shape the world. But it was also a period of immense, almost unimaginable human suffering. The same system that produced wonders of engineering and commerce also produced widespread poverty, disease, and exploitation on a scale never before seen. How did this happen? How could a society that was priding itself on its civilization, its enlightenment, and its growing prosperity allow such brutality to become the norm? This is one of the biggest questions historians grapple with. There is not a single, simple answer. One school of thought points to the power of ideology, specifically the philosophy of laissez-faire economics, championed by thinkers like Adam Smith. The idea was that the economy functioned best when left alone by the government. Interference, in the form of regulations on wages, hours, or working conditions, was seen as a hindrance to progress and prosperity. In its most extreme form, this ideology provided a powerful justification for factory owners to resist any attempts at reform. They were not just being greedy. They could argue they were following the natural laws of economics. Another perspective focuses on the sheer speed and chaos of the change, the shift from a rural, agrarian society to an urban, industrial one happened with breathtaking rapidity. Cities exploded in size. Millions of people were uprooted from their traditional way of life and thrown into a new, bewildering environment. The institutions of society, government, law, medicine, social services, were simply unable to keep up. They were archaic, pre-industrial structures that were completely overwhelmed by the scale of the new problems. The suffering was not so much a deliberate policy as it was a consequence of a society that was breaking down and being rebuilt all at once, with no blueprint, And here we find a strange and telling detail. The factory acts. The story of reform was not a single, heroic victory, but a long, slow, grinding battle fought over decades. The very first Factory Act was passed in 1802. It was aimed at improving conditions for the pauper apprentices you learned about. But it was almost completely useless because it had no effective mechanism for enforcement. More acts followed. The Act of 1819 forbade the employment of children under 9, but only in cotton mills. The Act of 1833 is often seen as the first truly meaningful one. It banned children under 9 from most textile mills, limited the hours of children aged 9 to 13 to only 9 hours a day, and, crucially, it established a professional factory inspectorate to actually enforce the law. The debate among historians about these acts is fierce. Were they a genuine humanitarian triumph, a sign of society's awakening conscience, or were they a pragmatic move by the ruling class to prevent a full-blown revolution? A slightly healthier, slightly less exploited workforce, the argument goes, is a more productive and less rebellious one. Some historians also point out that the most ardent supporters of factory reform were often not progressives. The traditional, landed aristocrats who were hostile to the new class of industrial capitalists. Their motives may have been less about helping the children and more about hurting their political and economic rivals. The road to reform was paved with a complex and often contradictory mix of altruism, self-interest, and political maneuvering. So, your suffering did, eventually, lead to change. The testimony of children like you, collected by parliamentary commissions, shocked the public and fueled the calls for reform. The secret meetings, the go-slows, the riots, they all played a part in forcing the hands of the powerful. But that change came too late for you. You are a member of the lost generation, the one that paid the highest price for progress. Your small, broken body is a testament to the brutal cost of building the modern world. Your story is a reminder that history is not a clean, triumphant march forward. It is a messy, painful, and often cruel process. The comfortable world we live in, with its labor laws, its safety standards, and its concept of a protected childhood, was not given. It was fought for, and it was paid for by the forgotten children of the revolution. So, here you are, at the end of our journey. You have walked today in the life of a factory child. You have felt the cold, breathed the dust, heard the roar, then known the fear. You have survived, but you are not the same. You carry the scars, both visible and invisible. But what happens to you now? What does the future hold for the fictional you we have been following? History is not a story with a neat and tidy ending. It is a river that flows on, and your life would have flowed with it, if you were lucky. Incredibly lucky. You might have survived to adulthood, but you would be a damaged adult. Your growth would be stunted from malnutrition. Your lungs would be scarred from the cotton dust, leaving you with a permanent, hacking, coffined, debilitating shortness of breath. You might be missing a finger, or have a limb that was badly set after being broken in a machine. You would likely be illiterate and innumerate, with no skills beyond the repetitive tasks of the factory floor. You would be trapped in the same cycle of poverty as your parents, working in the same factory until your body finally gave out. If you were a girl, your path would be even harder. You would work the same brutal hours as the boys, and then be expected to come home and take on the second shift of domestic labor, cooking, cleaning, and caring for younger siblings or your own children. Your life would be an endless cycle of labor, both paid and unpaid. There were, of course, Exceptions. They tiny fraction of people manage to claw their way out. Perhaps you had a natural talent for mechanics and caught the eye of a progressive factory owner. Perhaps you learned to read and write at a Sunday school run by a local church and found work as a clerk. Perhaps you joined a new police force or enlisted in the army, trading the tyranny of the factory for a different kind of discipline. These were the lottery winners of the industrial age. For every one of them, there were thousands, millions, who simply lived and died by the factory whistle. This brings us to one of the most poignant, undebated aspects of this history, the loss of human potential. What masterpieces of art or music weren't ever created because the hands that might have made them were busy mending threads for 16 hours a day? What scientific breakthroughs weren't ever discovered because the minds that might have conceived them were old by exhaustion and lack of education? What great leaders or thinkers were lost to a childhood of brutal, repetitive labor? We can never know. This is the great, uncontrovertible cost of the Industrial Revolution, the silencing of generations, the squandering of human genius on an industrial scale. Historians who study counterfactual history, the what-if scenarios, sometimes play with these ideas. What if the reforms had come 50 years earlier? What if the wealth generated by industry had been distributed more equitably from the start? What kind of society might have emerged? It is a fascinating, if ultimately unanswerable, question. It reminds us that the way things happened was not the only way they could have happened. History is a series of choices, and different choices could have led to a very different world. As we stand here at the end of this long day, looking back, it is easy to feel a sense of righteous anger and judgment towards the people of the past. How could they have been so cruel, so blind? But perhaps the more important lesson is one of humility. The people of the 19th century, for the most part, were not monsters. They were people like us, navigating a world that was changing at a dizzying pace, armed with their own set of beliefs, blind spots, and rationalizations. They believed in progress, in industry, in the power of their nation, and they were willing to accept a human cost for those things that we, today, find unacceptable. The final, lingering question is this: what are the blind spots of our own time? What accepted practices of our 21st century global economy will future generations look back on with the same horror and disbelief that we feel when we look at child labor in the 19th century? What injustices are we currently accepting as the necessary cost of progress? Your story is not just a ghost story from a distant, darker time. It is a mirror. It forces us to look at our own world and ask the hard questions, to wonder who is paying the price for our comfort, our convenience, our progress. You, the small, shivering child we met in the pre-dawn darkness, have a voice that echoes through the centuries. It is a quiet voice, easily lost in the roar of history. But if we listen closely, we can hear it. It is a warning. It is a reminder. It is a call to be better. Your day is over. But the story, in many ways, is not. And so, our long, difficult journey comes to a close. The roar of the looms begins to fade now, replaced by the soft, gentle hum of the fan in your room. The harsh glare of the gas lights dissolves, leaving only the quiet, peaceful darkness behind your eyelids. You can let go of the cold, the fear, the exhaustion. That world is far away now, a distant echo in the halls of history. You are safe. You are warm. You are comfortable in your bed. Feel the weight of your own body. A pleasant, gentle heaviness, so different from the crushing fatigue we spoke of tonight. Feel the softness of your pillow, the warmth of your blanket. Listen to the quiet rhythm of your own breathing. A slow, easy, peaceful sound. You are drifting now on a calm and gentle current, away from the noise and the struggle, towards a place of deep and restorative rest. The story is over. Your only job now is to let go, to float, to slide into the quiet, welcoming embrace of sleep. Allow the darkness to be a comforting blanket, a safe harbor where you can recharge and renew. Let the last vestiges of the factory fade into the mist, then allow your own peaceful dreams to take their place.